jungle.
Hello, you are listening to Trump Republic Radio. It is May 13th, 2018. It's also Mother's Day today. Hopefully, Bobby, you wished your mother happy Mother's Day.
I did. I drove her to the airport this morning. It was fantastic.
I wish my mother happy Mother's Day as well. We got a lot of news to cover this week. This has not been an insignificant week whatsoever. Just to preface before we start, though, I just wanted to say that I do have dogs in my house, so they may bark at some point. I can't control that very well, so sorry about that. But anything you want to say before we get into the news this week?
No, I think we should just go ahead and get right into it.
Okay. So the biggest thing, by far, I believe at least, that's happened this week is the Iran deal and our withdrawal from it.
Yes. On Tuesday, President Trump announced the U.S. was withdrawing from the Iran deal and would be restoring all previous sanctions on Iran. Germany, France, and Great Britain, which were also part of the deal, have announced that they are not leaving it. However, German companies this morning announced that they will be backing off from their business dealings with Iran, which is the first sign of European countries backing away from the Iran deal. And Iranian President Hassan Rouhani has also said that he was sending his foreign ministers to the remaining countries to try and negotiate further. Most of the sanctions have to do with Iran's ability to export oil. However, Trump is also allowing a grace period, I heard it was 90 days, for businesses to wind down their activity in order to soften any negative impacts economically that leaving the deal may cause. And in case you were wondering about Iran's ability to export oil, Iran is currently the world's fifth largest producer of oil. Now, leaving the Iran deal was something that Trump ran on when he was president, so
yes.
We do have to just mention that as we continue to talk about just, what this actually means for the country.
So, I don't know exactly what your opinion on this is. I imagine it's similar to mine, we might have a different viewpoint from a lot of Trump supporters, but I am not happy that this happened whatsoever. I don't think that this is a good idea.
Well, my opinion on it personally is I'm not happy that we're leaving the Iran deal the way that we are leaving it, which is essentially, it appears, at least anyone that's looking at it, not doing too much research on it, it would appear that the reason we're doing it is because of recent events in Israel and how they are treating the Iranians right now. So it's, part of you can say, oh, it looks like bad timing. But my opinion on it is, I don't want any war to happen between the United States and Iran. If Israel and Iran...
And this definitely gets us closer to that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And that's something I don't want to see. If Israel and Iran want to fight amongst themselves, let them do it. Unfortunately, the U.S. is probably going to get involved if that happens. Now, the U.S. definitely does not want to go to war in Iran. I know Israel does want to try to go to war in Iran and get the U.S. into it, but, the U.S. just, they want to pull out. They don't really want war with Iran if they can try to avoid it. I've heard rumors that the U.S. is going to try to renegotiate a better Iran deal, and that's kind of where I'm coming from this, is that although I don't like the fact that we are leaving the old Iran deal, it was still a terrible deal. And so, you need to update it. And if you've seen how Trump has done with TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, if you've seen how Trump has done with the Paris Climate Accords, it's always, whenever there is a bad deal that the U.S. is involved in, he's like, look, let's leave the thing first, then come back to the negotiating table and say, okay, let's do it for real this time in a better way. It looks as if that's what the U.S. is probably going to do. Now, granted, there might be some military skirmishes here and there. I know we're going to get later into the show talking about Israeli airstrikes on Iranian military in Syria, and the Iranian military kind of, launching some missiles back in retaliation from that. And, if they want to just do that on their own without us getting involved, have at it. I don't care. But I just don't want us to get involved. And by leaving the Iran deal, especially in the way that we did, especially with the influence that Israel does have over our foreign policy in that regard, yeah, I'm not happy about the way that we did this at all.
Yeah, so there's been polling that's been coming out on support for the Iran deal, and at the moment, it has the highest support it ever has. I believe it's around 55 to 58% of Americans support the Iran deal, while around only 25% support withdrawal. So this action by Trump didn't win him any voters whatsoever. But secondly, all of Europe has opposed withdrawing from the Iran deal, so he hasn't ingratiated himself to our allies either. The only, country that's happy that we've done this is Israel, who's been calling for regime change. And, in a second we're going to go into potential White House plans for regime change. But, yeah, I don't like using economic sanctions because it doesn't punish the regime. It's only going to punish the Iranians. And if people are so mad that Iranians say death to America, why do you think starving them economically would ingratiate themselves to you? It doesn't make any sense. All it does is it promotes more hostility between the two countries, and yeah, I don't think a war with Iran would turn out well at all. It'd be extremely costly.
Yeah, sorry.
And in terms of what the deal is for, Iran hasn't had a nuclear program since 2003. There hasn't been a single inspection to suggest that they have any sort of nuclear weapons plan since. It's as much evidence for Iranian nuclear weapons as there is for WMDs in Iraq. To think about for a second, during the Iraq-Iran war, just to pull it back even farther in scope, they had the capabilities to create chemical weapons. And, the Iraqis were using chemical weapons that we provided to them against the Iranians. But the Iranians, throughout the entire scope of the Iraqi-Iranian war, never used chemical weapons because they saw it as immoral. If they, with the proven track record, show that they don't use weapons of mass destruction, even with the capabilities against, an opponent trying to destroy their nation, what makes you suggest that they're trying to do so now?
Yeah, precisely. And, one of the things that people aren't really looking at, per se, is just the current state of how things in Iran actually are. You have to, just look at GDP numbers alone. The GDP per capita in the United States is $56,000, okay? The GDP per capita of Israel is $37,000. The GDP per capita of Iran is less than $5,000, okay? And if you look at the way that their economy has been going, especially over the last few months, it hasn't been doing very well at all. Their economy is actually, if it's not already in a recession, it's quickly heading towards that right now. And so even if there was any sort of large-scale military conflict that Iran was to get involved in, whether or not they started it, Israel started it, or we started it, there's no way that they're going to actually be able to sustain a lasting, long-time war. In fact, if you look at the GDP per capita of Iran over the last couple of years, back in 2011, their per capita GDP was at $7,800. Now it's at $4,900. So it's dropped by I'm just doing math quickly in my head, a third or so over the last 7 or 8 years ish, time period, if you want to, depending on how you look at it. So, Iran has not been very successful just on their own. Now, as you said before, placing more sanctions on Iran, if their GDP per capita went down without the sanctions that were there, I can't imagine just how bad it's going to get with the more sanctions that they put on Iran. And so I want to say that, there is a way that you can interpret this to say that by leaving the Iran deal and placing more sanctions on Iran, you're essentially killing the Iranian economy, which would actually prevent their ability to conduct war. You would prevent their ability to be able to fund a war, even if they tried to get money. They're not going to be able to get money from Saudi Arabia. Iran and Saudi Arabia are enemies. Iran doesn't really have that many friendly forces around besides Russia, and we're going to get later in the program, we're going to talk about Israeli airstrikes that they launched on the Iranian forces in Syria. They even warned Russia ahead of time that they were going to do that, and Russia, made sure that their guys were out of the way. Russia does not want to get involved between Iran and Israel's battles right now. At least that's how it appears. Because, you talk about the U.S. not wanting to get involved. We've talked about the show before, whether or not you think Russia is a friendly ally to the United States or not. Nobody wants to actually go to war against Russia right now. The American population does not want that. The American population doesn't want to go to Iran. Granted, the Iran deal is just a big, complicated mess. Yeah, leaving it is a bad idea, but I just don't think that all this talk about, it's going to start a war, it's going to blah, 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 I just don't necessarily actually see that happening. Although, I could very well be wrong, but I don't actually think that full-scale war against Iran is going to happen. But I do think that skirmishes are definitely going to continue.
Yeah. My thing is just, I don't have any personal issue with the Iranian people whatsoever, so I don't feel a reason to punish these people. And
Absolutely
economic
not.
sanctions, when they're already very poor, why would economic sanctions create a better situation? It doesn't make any sense to me. But I guess there's one thing I want to plug before getting into the next thing that's connected to it. There was, on the Tom Woods show, he had on to talk about the Iran deal, Gareth Porter, who's a historian and journalist with a PhD from Cornell University. And he talks about the history of the Iranian nuclear program and, the propaganda that shrouds it, which, a lot of people in their knowledge of Iran, it's just pure propaganda. And I think it is really concise 45 minutes that explains it all very well, and I suggest anyone to listen to that if they want to understand kind of a better understanding of why we, as Trump supporters, are against leaving the Iran deal. But with that said, I want to get into some leaked plans on potential for regime change. So the Washington Free Beacon has attained a 3-page white paper that's being passed around by National Security Council officials drafting plans to spark regime change in Iran. The plan's author, Security Studies Group, is a national security think tank with close ties to National Security Advisor John Bolton. John Bolton, who called for regime change in Iran by 2019, just to clarify. Quote, the ordinary people of Iran are suffering under economic stagnation, while the regime ships its wealth abroad to fight its expansionist wars and to pad the bank accounts of the mullahs and the IRGC command, SGG writes in the paper. This has provoked noteworthy protests across the recent months, it further claims, as an argument for regime change. So this is stuff that's definitely being talked about right now. And, just a couple days ago, Rudy Giuliani said that even President Trump would be in support of regime change. So, they have all of the assets and the supporters there to do so, to push for regime change right now. So it's very important to oppose war right now because we're on a path that heads towards that.
And I will say one thing. If you want to try to spark regime change in a country, the way that you do that is by breaking down the country. And that starts with breaking down a country's economy. Hence, leaving the Iran deal, reinstating sanctions, hurts their economy, hurts their country, makes their inability to conduct the war that they currently have in Iran. They're not going to be able to continue to do that. I'm sorry, not in Iran, but in Syria. So, if you're someone who's on the side of Israel or, I guess the United States, having Iranian forces in Syria is not going to help. But that being said, have they actually gone into detail at all about what their plans for regime change are, or is this just a story that's been released that's kind of an idea that was floating around people's heads?
Well, at the moment, they're not talking about, per se, invading Iran with tanks, but they want to do anything possible to bring the regime down.
So that's would be why, like, I was going to say, so that would be like, when we saw those protests in Iran a couple of months ago, especially with like that girl that took off her hijab, it would essentially be stuff like supporting those kinds of people, giving them money, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah. But the thing is, and that's why I mentioned like Western propaganda, the media didn't talk about this whatsoever, but there's protests much, much larger than those protests against the regime in support of the regime.
Yeah.
They don't show that whatsoever because, you know, the Western media wants us to, you know, change the regime out in Iran. And I just don't think that would bring any stability to the region. And one of the things that kind of irritates me is they talk about shipping their wealth abroad to fighting these expansionist wars. You know, they always like to use this line that Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Okay, one, that's not even objectively true. The Saudi Arabians do way more than the Iranians do. You know, the Iranians are a predominantly Shiite country. Most terrorist organizations are Sunni.
Right.
You know, they're opposed to the Iranians in most instances. I mean, they consider support for the Houthis in Yemen to be support of terrorism, as we as Americans support the Saudi Arabians attacking civilians in Yemen. You know, I think if you can look objectively at American foreign policy, there's many instances where we're the bad guys or we're supporting bad regimes, which is why I don't think that we have a really high moral ground to stand on when we criticize these other regimes. And as a nationalist, I want to be someone that respects other people's sovereignty because I want my own sovereignty to be respected, which is why, you know, I don't want to push for regime change whatsoever in other nations.
Yeah, and the last thing that I want to say, I guess, before I'm ready to move on per se, is that in order to successfully have a regime change, a few things have to happen. Number one, the regime has to allow itself to be changed or be forced to be changed. Number two, you have to either get the people, you know, the people of Iran to support regime change, or get them to, you know, be okay with, you know, a regime changing. And like you said, the pro-Iranian protests were a lot bigger than the anti-regime protests were just a couple of months ago. So even if the U.S. wanted to try to push...
And they fizzled out very quickly.
Yeah. Even if the U.S. wanted to even try to push some sort of regime change, whatever that may be in Iran, it's going to be an uphill battle. And, you know, it's possible they might be testing the waters right now just to see, you know, is that even possible? Part of me deep down, I don't see it happening. I don't see any regime change coming to Iran, even if the U.S. or Israel, any other countries try to push for it, at least as the way things are right now. Now, that being said, if you start putting the sanctions back after leaving the Iran deal and it hurts their economy even further, that might change. But as of right now, I don't see any way that that's going to be successful with that military invasion, and that is definitely something that the U.S. is trying to avoid right now.
And you look historically, the United States has caused regime change in Iran before, Operation Ajax in the 1950s. And what happened is they had, you know, a pro-U.S. dictator rule ruthlessly over the country for decades. And, you know, to the point to where they had to overthrow this dictator, which is why, you know, the Iranians took over the American embassy in the 80s. This wasn't a hostility that came out of nowhere. You know, we have caused tons of suffering on the Iranian people throughout, you know, the decades. So, I don't know, we just have a bad track record with these sort of things.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I like to use this term a lot in the show, but I really do mean it every time I say it. It's one of those things where you're just going to have to wait and see what happens. And, you know, hope that the cards fall in line with what we want to have happen and not with what we don't want to have happen. But especially, you know, at this point right now, it's just all speculation as to what possibly could happen, with both sides making very good arguments for what they believe. So, you know, I don't want to see regime change in Iran. I don't want to see war with Iran. I don't want to see the U.S. getting involved in any more wars, were Iran to go to war with Israel or anybody else in the region. I just want us to stay out of it. So, you know, we can speculate all day long on what we think is going to happen, but at the end of the day, we're just going to have to wait and see.
Yeah. With that said, let's go on to some other unrelated stuff with Mueller.
Yeah, so the first story we have right here is a judge has rejected Mueller's request for a delay in a Russian troll farm case. U.S. District Court Judge Dabney Friedrich has rejected special counsel Robert Mueller's request to delay the first court hearing in a criminal case charging 3 Russian companies and 13 Russian citizens for using social media to cause chaos among Americans during the 2016 election. The 3 businesses are the Internet Research Agency, Concord Management, and Concord Catering. And also, the 13 Russian citizens are unlikely to ever appear in a U.S. court. Now, that is important, worth mentioning before we get to the next part, because the 3 companies were expected to simply ignore the American criminal proceedings, but last month a pair of lawyers notified the court that they represented Concord Management, demanding non-public details about the case and the investigation. And Mueller's team then requested a delay in the court hearing, but because the judge wouldn't allow a delay, it appears that Mueller's bluff has been called. Either that or Mueller's team must now publicly disclose everything they have in case in the court. So essentially, here's what was going on here. As part of the whole Russian investigation, the Mueller probe essentially wanted to slap some charges on these Russian companies for apparently having some sort of troll farm where they would then publish things on social media to try to, support Trump, or in this case, just, sow division in the American citizens online. And they never at all, the Mueller team that is, never expected these companies or these people to actually defend themselves in court. It was essentially just going to be what's the word
it's
they use?
It's outside their jurisdiction.
Not like a jungle courtroom or a monkey cage. What's the word where it's just like a sham trial? That word that they like to use a lot.
Just a trial?
But when it's like a sham trial, like a kangaroo court, that's what I'm thinking of. They expected this to essentially just be a kangaroo court case. You'd slap some charges, you'd go in there, you'd lay out your prosecution, and then the judge would just, side with you because the other side didn't really have any defense. Now, the other side, these Russian companies, are coming to their defense saying, no, you want to charge us with criminally doing things to cause chaos in Americans? We are going to defend ourselves. Oh yeah, and by the way, since we actually showed up, and this is a public court case, you're going to have to make public all information that you have regarding, the whole case itself. And so that's important because now they're forced to do it. And, they'll be forced to actually say what information they have on any alleged Russian, stuff. I'm kind of rambling on here, but do you kind of get get what I'm saying here?
Yeah, they're defending themselves and they're not backing down. And Mueller expected them to never actually come to their own defense. He used this as a means to, give legitimacy to his probe. But if he actually has to bring a case against these people, he doesn't actually have the sort of evidence to do so. So he'll likely lose.
In this, what it really does is it just makes the whole Mueller probe look bad. Essentially.
Yeah.
Anyways, well, that's pretty much all I have for that case.
So is there anything else on this?
No, it's just that the judge has rejected the case, which means the case is going to go forward. And also, I guess the last thing I would say is that because Mueller's team never really expected them to defend themselves, their own prosecution isn't very strong, per se. So now they have to essentially create their own prosecution and devote more time and money and resources to this court case that otherwise would have gone to just, general other Mueller probe type of stuff.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to move on to the next story.
Yeah, with that said, let's move on. This week, Trump's Office of Management and Budget has requested that the federal legislative branch rescind more than $15 billion in previously appropriated funds that haven't been sent. This package of rescissions would be the largest in U.S. history. Under the Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act of 1974, Congress has 45 days to act upon the president's request. Any member of Congress can submit a bill with a rescission request, and it cannot be filibustered in the Senate. $76 billion have been rescinded from the U.S. federal government in the last 44 years. So what does this mean? There is money that's been appropriated that hasn't been used. And Trump wants Congress to rescind it so it just goes to pay for, the federal debt, the federal deficit. So it's Trump trying to bring some sort of accountability to government to where, they've appropriated money they just don't even have a use for. So it's him being efficient.
Yeah, and especially when we get to the economics portion, we've actually, we're actually running a surplus right now. So, of well over $15 billion. I mean, it's in like the 200, like $100+ billion right now. So, if Trump can request that the federal government rescind any amount of money, that's fantastic. I mean, we both come from similar backgrounds and what we think about, government spending per se. And any time that you can cut government spending that's unnecessary, I'm all for it. Now, granted, like we said, under the Congressional Budget and Impound Control Act of 1974, Congress still has 45 days to act upon the request. So, over the next 45 days, we'll see what happens there. And since any member of Congress can submit a bill with the request, that would be code word for, if you're listening to this, put pressure on your congressman to cut in areas where you think things can be cut, or at least put pressure on them.
And the plan's already written up. They just need to draft it.
Yeah, so just, put pressure on your congressman to support these rescission requests if one were to come up and then be voted on. Thank God it can't be filibustered in the Senate, so that essentially just forces a vote on it, I think, right? If you can't filibuster something and you actually submit it, that would just trigger a floor vote, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
So, that's good, and hopefully all 15 billion will be rescinded, so.
Yeah. So moving on, I actually have another thing related to Mueller. There was a lot of things actually this week on Mueller, and that is that Comey consulted with Mueller on his Russia testimony. Top government watchdog group Judicial Watch has released a batch of emails showing fired FBI Director James Comey consulted with Special Counsel Robert Mueller about his Russia testimony. The emails show senior FBI officials advised Comey to seek out Mueller's advice before any, quote, congressional hearing, and that Comey was advised on the, quote, circumstances of his firing with Mueller. These emails strongly imply that Comey was coordinating with Mueller prior to testifying in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee in June of 2017. During Comey's testimony, he testified that he leaked memos he created while with the FBI detailing conversations with President Trump to a friend with the instruction to give to the New York Times. Comey also testified that he leaked the memos with the intent of having a special counsel appointed. So what does this all mean? It means that there was collusion in the FBI for Comey and Mueller to work together to create a special counsel to go after Donald Trump. And, when you look at the emails when they produced this stuff, I believe it was May 17th. During May, Comey was called to testify, and they have all of the emails from all the FBI officials saying, oh, you need to go to talk to Mueller about all this stuff and whatnot. You need to talk to Mueller before you do anything. And what happens the very next day? After he talks to Mueller, he then accepts going in front of the Senate to testify. So he's getting his story straight so they don't screw each other up on it.
Right. And I don't think this should come as a surprise to anybody paying attention that Comey, essentially was on the side of Mueller and wanted to try to get a special counsel appointed to go after Trump or, whatever you think that the Mueller probe is actually trying to do right now. But yeah, it doesn't shock me at all. These people are all part of the swamp. And yeah, I mean, I really don't have much else to say besides that.
No, it's just, it's crazy that, the advice that Mueller gave to Comey is very much likely the stuff that he used to testify in front of the Senate.
Oh, absolutely.
And, it is likely then that Mueller knew about Comey and these leaks and how he had the intention to use the leaks to get a special counsel appointed, which this special counsel just so happens to be the one that Mueller is appointed to do. So it is Mueller's own suggestions that brought about, the special counsel being called, that he heads up to go after the president, something that he also wanted to do.
Exactly.
So yeah, very Very infuriating person.
And you know, we know from different court hearings and stuff that the Mueller probe was started with absolutely zero intelligence to back it up, to provide at least any sort of justification for launching that thing. We know.
Well, not even zero, just bad intelligence, which is the next thing that we're even getting into.
If anything, it's negative intelligence, because what they have issued and said, here's our proof, has been, you know, essentially was like the Pussygate article type, you know, the dossier, the Steele dossier, which, yeah, we're going to talk about that next. That's essentially all they have, and even that thing's been proven wrong. So, yeah, it's not only did they not have evidence, the evidence they did have was completely fake. Hence the term negative that I use.
Yeah, and that goes into the next thing that we have here, that McCain admits to giving Comey the Steele dossier. In an upcoming book, The Restless Wave, to be released on May 22nd, John McCain admits to giving fired former FBI Director James Comey the unverified dossier compiled by former British intelligence officer Christopher Steele, paid for by the Democratic National Convention and the Clinton campaign. Quote, I agreed to receive a copy of what is now referred to as the dossier, writes McCain in his upcoming book. I reviewed its contents. The allegations were disturbing, but I had no idea which, if any, were true. I could not independently verify any of it, and so I did what any American who cares about our nation's security should have done. I went to see him at, and he meaning Comey, I went to see him at his earliest convenience, handed him the dossier, explained how it had come into my possession. I said I didn't know what to make of it, and I trusted the FBI would examine it carefully and investigate its claims. With that, I thanked the director and left. The entire meeting was probably not lasted more than 10 minutes. I did what duty demanded I do. And this dossier, handed to Comey, is the one that they use as evidence, you know, one, for the wiretapping of the Trump campaign of Christopher Page, but two, as the evidence to call special counsel on Trump for collusion with the Russians. And the whole time, it was funded by the Democratic National Convention and the Clinton campaign.
And you also have to remember, there's, you know, I want to reread that one quote that McCain said. I went to see him at his earliest convenience, handed him the dossier, explained how it had come into my possession. You have to remember exactly how John McCain came about actually getting that. He got it because it was given to him by Rick Wilson, who is a very slimy writer. I forget exactly where he's a writer for. I think he blocked me on Twitter, but yeah, he's a never Trumper. He's supposedly a Republican. He's definitely not. He's written for the Daily Beast, Politico, the New York Daily News, the Federalist, Independent. He's an independent writer, supposedly a Republican. You know, he's one of the people that whenever the left likes to say, oh, you know, Republicans disagree with Trump, it's always guys like this. But yeah, he is a never Trumper. He has hated Trump. He's on the side of the DNC. He supports their policies. In no way is he at any party conservative. That's how McCain got it, because it was given to him by Rick Wilson. And if you ever see Rick Wilson, they like to throw him and interview him on TV a lot. I mean, just the other day I was at the gym and MSNBC was on one of the TVs there, and he was being interviewed by them right then and there. And I'm just like, God, these people, you can never get away from them.
These Republicans only have significance in their opposition to Trump.
Yeah, that's the only reason.
They don't have any sort of influence in the Republican Party whatsoever.
No, and Rick Wilson, if I'm not mistaken, he was a supporter of Egg McMuffin out in Utah. Evan McMullen is his real name. He was a supporter of his. You know, the sole purpose of him running to try to steal votes from Trump so that Trump couldn't win. The only point in that guy even existing as a candidate. And Rick Wilson has dedicated his career over the last few years to that sort of person. So, you know, the guy, he's a slimeball, he's a sleaze, and he's part of the reason that this whole dossier stuff even exists right now. Because you have to remember, even though the DNC and the Clinton campaign paid for this thing to be created by British intelligence officer Christopher Steele, it was still then given to people who gave it to people who gave it to the FBI. And the person who it was given to before John McCain was Rick Wilson. So a lot of people leave him out whenever they talk about the whole dossier and how it came to pass. A lot of people leave out the fact that it was also never Trumpers that were involved in this thing. It wasn't just the DNC.
Yeah. So with all this talk of, the Russian collusion narrative, we're going to close at the top of the national news with the poll that came out from CBS News on how most Americans don't believe in the Russian collusion narrative. 53% of Americans believe Mueller's Russia investigation is politically motivated, while 44% think the investigation is justified. 67% of Americans still believe Trump should cooperate if asked to be interviewed by the Mueller team. This is down from 84% back in January. This includes 53% of Republicans, down from 73% in January. 33% said Republicans in Congress should try to end the investigation, while 64% said Republicans should let the investigation continue. 90% of Democrats said for it to continue, while only 29% of Republicans said to do so.
Yeah, so, this poll alone, we've seen other similar polls to it, but just the whole Russia collusion narrative, it's been falling apart over the last couple of months. This poll just goes ahead and proves it. I mean, even if you look at just how far the numbers in general have dropped, 84% in January said Trump should cooperate. That's down to 76% right now, including if you look at that Republicans number, 73% said cooperate in January, down to 53% now. If even the Republicans that are out there are starting to really, really, really doubt the Russia probe and the whole Russia collusion narrative. I mean, that's one, not the entire point, but that's one of the points of the Russian collusion narrative, is to try to get the smaller fraction of Republicans that aren't necessarily 100% behind Trump to believe that he isn't a very good guy. And if that's down to just barely a very small majority of Republicans who even think he should cooperate if he's interviewed, that's not going to bid well for that Mueller probe right now, especially since a third of Republicans want to end the investigation at this point. I'm not sure what that number was back in January. I don't think that the article that we read actually said that. But, if only 29% of Republicans say to let it continue, or I'm sorry, yeah. So, anyways.
So with that said, let's get into some of the economic numbers for this week. We got some good news on that front.
Yeah, so the first things first, the Congressional Budget Office has said that April was the best month in history for the U.S. budget. In the month of April, the federal government collected a record $515 billion in taxes and only spent $297 billion, which leaves us with a $218 billion surplus, which is the largest monthly record since a $190 billion surplus was set back in 2001. The Congressional Budget Office attributes most of the revenue increase to Americans having higher incomes, saying, quote, "These payments were mostly related to economic activity in 2017 and may reflect stronger than expected income growth in that year. Part of the strength in receipts also may reflect larger than anticipated payments for economic activity in 2018. So, if we look at the tax cut bill that was made back in December, individual income tax collection, that change doesn't really go into effect until 2019, that April. So people that were paying taxes this year were still paying it based off of last year's rate. Now that also includes different the business taxes, which was lowered down from 35% to 21%. I believe that actually went into effect immediately. And so that's part of the reason why you're seeing this. But what's interesting is you'd think that by lowering your tax rate, you'd collect less in taxes, and yet the opposite is true. They collected more taxes than they ever have in history before. They're saying that the reason that they're doing this is because Americans are having higher incomes, which, that goes to show you. If you look at the way that the economy has gone over the last year, the economy is doing great. Granted, the actual incomes for Americans on paper does not appear to be growing that much. It's growing slowly, but it's not growing too much. But at the same time, yet that translates into a record amount of taxes collected, and I'm surprised the government only spent $297 billion. We talk about how bad the deficit is in this country. I mean, after Trump signed that that spending bill, it was like almost $1 trillion deficit, and yet in like the month following him signing that, we have a $218 billion surplus. Part of me actually doesn't understand how this was even possible, but I'm happy for it. I mean, whatever is going on there with the economy and with tax collection, somehow it's working and something's going right. So I just want to be one of those people that says, okay, take your hands off of it and let it continue, because that $218 billion in surplus, that essentially goes to pay for the deficit right now, unless it gets pushed on to the next month's spending. So yeah.
Yeah, but as far as you mentioned the corporate rates dropping down. Originally we were at 35 and now we're at 21%. We haven't seen the drop off in taxes collected, and a lot of that is due to when they have the capital available to them, they can create wealth off that capital. So because they had an increase in wealth, there was actually still a sustained growth, in tax recipients, or at least not a fall off like you'd imagine you'd see when you cut corporate taxes down so much.
Yeah, if anything, it kind of evens itself out. With the amount that you'd be collecting less in taxes, the amount of growth that you have instead actually raises it back to about where it was. At least it appears right now it's raised it slightly higher. So, like I said, I'm glad that we're running a surplus right now, largest surplus since 2001. A lot of people like to talk about the fact that we had a surplus near the end of the Bill Clinton's presidency, and that was actually an issue in the 2000 presidential election, was to say, okay, hey, we're running a surplus right now. What do we do with it? I'm glad we're running a surplus. If we can keep this going and use that money to even if we can just not necessarily pay down part of the debt, the national debt, but just if it's going to make it expand at a slower rate, like instead of going up at like $1 trillion per year, if it could only go up by like 750 billion instead, just slow down the rate of growth, that's going to save the country so much in the future. So anything we can do right now to make that better is fantastic, and things look like right now they're going very well.
Yeah. So the other story that we have for economic news is also pretty much just as good, and that is America has enough jobs for everyone. According to the Labor Department on Tuesday, at the end of March, there were a record 6.6 million job openings. With an unemployment rate of 3.9%, that means there's enough jobs for every single unemployed person. This is the first time in the history of tracking this data to have ever happened.
And so that's really, really good news.
Yeah,
sorry, you go ahead.
Oh no, yeah, it's very great, and to go along with how the U.S. budget is working so well, I just don't know how Democrats can spin on the economy being bad when you see these strong performance numbers. I don't know how you ingratiate yourselves to a public to say that you need to be in control when the Republicans aren't running things terribly whatsoever right now.
Yeah, and I'm not the biggest fan of how just the Republican Party is acting right now, but economics-wise, what they're doing for the economy is, probably the strongest area where I support them right now. Now, the one thing about these 6.6 million job openings is a lot of that is skilled labor, and a lot of the people that are unemployed right now are unskilled labor. So granted, on paper, it would show that there are enough jobs for everyone. There's a reason why people that are unemployed remain unemployed. In terms of the ones that are, actively trying to find a job and not just collecting unemployment just to, have some supplemental income there. But yeah, that's part of the reason why is unemployment, which also leads to underemployment as well, because, underemployment is a problem that we've actually seen gotten better over the last couple of years. If you don't know, underemployment essentially means, like, if you're a college graduate who has some big degree, you should theoretically be working at some really good job using your degree. But if you just can't find a job and then you have to go working at McDonald's or something, you're underemployed, and that's a big problem. And that's part of what we've seen over the last couple of years. It actually started before Trump became president, but it's greatly increased at a much higher rate since Trump became president, and that's part-time jobs, people with part-time jobs shifting over to full-time jobs. Your underemployed guy who's a college graduate who's working at McDonald's now has gotten his office job and is making twice as much income. That's the type of thing that we're shifting over. So on paper, it would show that the same number of people have jobs, yet you would also see that individual American take-home pay is going up. That's part of the reason why April was the best month for the U.S. budget in history. That's part of the reason why we're collecting record taxes, is because, of the fixing that problem of underemployment. Now, what that does is, if you have a position available with a good company and a guy working at like McDonald's and he shifts over to the good company, there's still going to be the same number of job openings and there's still going to be the same number of people employed. But what you've done is you've shifted the playing field as to what the job openings actually are right now. So that's just, I'm kind of, again, rambling, but just keep that in mind when you're also looking at these numbers, is just because there's 6.6 million job openings doesn't mean that every single unemployed person should be working in those jobs or is going to be able to work in those jobs.
Yeah. Not everyone is qualified for the amount of openings that we have, but just in terms of openings that we have, it would be enough to fill just on that kind of unnuanced number.
Yeah.
But with that said, want to get into some immigration for this week. We got quite a lot of stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
Open the door! Immigration!
La migra, vamos, niños!
This week in immigration.
Okay, so for the first thing that we want to talk about as far as immigration is concerned this week is some stuff Jeff Sessions has said.
Yes. During a law enforcement conference in Scottsdale, Arizona on Monday, Attorney General Jeff Sessions made comments about illegal alien children in the country, saying, quote, "If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child will be separated from you as required by law. If you don't like that, then don't smuggle children over our border." So that's the quote that he said. Now, continuing, adults charged with illegal entry will be turned over to U.S. Marshals and sent directly to federal court. Their children will be transferred to the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, which refers them to relatives in the U.S. or to shelters run by private organizations. The Department of Homeland Security says that 700 children have been separated from their parents since the fiscal year began back in October. Although technically this is not a new policy, it is part of the Trump administration's plans to take a tougher approach on immigration leading up to the 2018 midterm elections. Essentially what Sessions is saying is he's saying, look, if you have illegal alien kids and you're an illegal alien in this country, we're going to separate you from your kids and you're going to get tried and you're going to get deported. Whether or not your kids get deported, that's, a million lawsuits in the way of that actually happening, which is unfortunate. But at least it appears that by coming forward, by releasing these statements, they're pushing the whole narrative that, yeah, we are stepping up our immigration approach leading up to the midterms. I mean, even last week we talked about how Trump is going to be actively trying to end catch and release here going forward, especially before the midterms. So this is more one of those things that it's kind of indicative of where we are headed rather than what we are currently actually doing or what we have been doing.
Yeah, and, it's a tough measure that I think is completely needed. You need to disincentivize people bringing children here. In a lot of cases, the people bringing the children here aren't even their parents.
No, they're not.
And a lot of the kids that are brought over here, they end up getting molested on the border. We talked many times about the rates of rape and sexual assault that happens along the border. The majority of women that, try to cross the U.S.-Mexico border at some point will be raped.
Yeah.
So, they always want to complain about, you don't separate the parents from the kids. Well, don't come then. We don't want you. We're not trying to let you come here. So.
Yeah, again, exactly what Jeff Sessions said. If you don't like that, then don't smuggle children over the border. It's as simple as that. Play stupid games, you win stupid prizes.
Yeah. Talking about deportation, though, that goes into the next thing that we have, and that is deportations to Mexico have been increasing. Mexican governmental data shows that the first 3 months of 2018, the U.S. has deported 53,764 Mexican nationals back to their home country. That is up 40% from the same period of time last year. This year's figure years have already surpassed all of 2016 under Barack Obama.
Now, do you happen to know if this is including catch and release, or I'm sorry, is this including people that are turned away at the border, or is this actual deportations, like people being arrested in the country and then sent back? Do you know?
I believe this would also include people sent back at the border, not just internal enforcement.
Which would actually make sense. You know, we talked about last week how everyone was freaking out that border crossings are up like 230%, although that was, you know, we talked about how the data actually showed that, you know, because of the whole Trump effect, because there was a slowdown in border crossings after Trump became president, it returning to normal levels is what appeared on paper to be this 200-something% increase. Which also shows why, you know, if your deportations are up 40% for last year, naturally with more people crossing the border, if that is including people that are turned away at the border, which technically count as deportations, that's the reason why the Obama administration liked to say that they deported more people than anyone in history, was because of that. It wasn't actually people being arrested in the country, what we like to think of when we hear the word quote-unquote deportation. So yeah, this is nothing, but this is great news, you know. The less people crossing the border, the better. The more people that are illegally in this country that we can deport, the better. So I'm absolutely happy with this.
Going into the next story that we have for immigration, you know, I believe it was about a month back now, Trump called for the National Guard to be stationed at the border, and there has been some success with the National Guard doing so.
Yes. Ever since National Guard troops began being deployed to the U.S.-Mexico border, they have assisted U.S. Customs and Border Protection officers in apprehending an additional 1,600 people attempting to cross the border illegally. This is in addition to 451 more people the Border Patrol were able to turn back before they illegally entered the United States. Having National Guard troops helping monitor the border has freed up additional Border Patrol agents to physically guard the border. As a result, they have been able to stop more criminal activity than ever before. As of Wednesday, there were only 775 troops deployed to the border, providing direct support on the ground, which is much lower than the 4,000 troops requested by President Trump. However, you know, we talked about how California was kind of iffy on whether or not they were going to send some troops. They said they're going to be sending about 200 more near the end of this month. So that number might get around 1,000 troops on the border by the beginning of June. Again, we'll just have to wait to see if that actually happens. But hey, you know, this is part of the reason why we wanted to send National Guard troops down there, so that they can take over the individual, like, monitoring type thing, free up the Border Patrol agents to go out there and do their jobs, stopping people crossing the border and catching people that have crossed the border in order to send them back. So it's absolutely good news. I think I heard somewhere that they said that Border Patrol was, like, requesting additional transport equipment as well, that they weren't previously able to get. There's also rumors that some land that's down near the border is going to be used as like a permanent military installation that doesn't currently exist, which will essentially be the hub for National Guard troops to work out of in terms of, you know, border protection activities that they would be doing down there. So that's good news going forward, something that we have to look forward to.
Yeah. They have been especially useful in adding extra surveillance to the border because it allows them to look over areas that the Border Patrol aren't presently in. But yeah, hopefully we can get the number up to 4,000 like Trump requested. Moving on now, I want to talk about some stuff that's happening in the House of Representatives that not a lot of people actually know is going on, but could be pretty bad. And that is rogue House Republicans file petition for amnesty vote. On Wednesday, Representative Carlos Curbelo, a Republican from Florida, filed a discharge petition that would force a vote on Representative Jeff Denham's Queen of the Hill resolution. By Thursday, 17 representatives have signed onto the discharge petition, and as of now, I believe there's 19. The discharge petition would allow the representatives to bypass House leadership and bring the resolution to vote. It would take 26 Republicans for this to happen, assuming all Democrats support the resolution. The rarely used Queen of the Hill procedure brings multiple bills on the same issue up for vote, with the one receiving the most votes moving on to the Senate. The four bills up for consideration are the following: The Securing America's Future Act by Representative Goodlatte, which has 95 Republican cosigns and 0 from Democrats. And this bill is particularly very good. It gets rid of stuff like the diversity visa program. Also up is the DREAM Act of 2017 by Representative Roybal Allard. This has 6 Republican cosigns and 196 Democratic cosigns.
It's pretty much every Democrat.
This is the one that, yeah, this is the one that is most dangerous. The DREAM Act would be legalization not only for DACA, but it would be around 3.5 million illegal aliens would receive legalized status by this passing. The third bill that is up for the Queen of the Hill procedure is the USA Act of 2018 by Representative Hurd. This is 29 Republican cosigns and 30 Democratic cosigns. This bill, it would give legal status for DACA. It would do some minor things for immigration, but overall, this bill sucks as well. And the fourth bill would be a bill picked by Speaker Paul Ryan. So what's happening now is there's a lot of Republicans that, you know, support an amnesty, and they're getting together. And I'll go through the list of Republicans very quickly. It's Carlos Curbelo from Florida, Jeff Denham from California, David Valadao from California, Will Hurd from Texas, Mario Diaz-Balart from Florida, Mia Love from Utah, Ailina Ross Liddon from Florida, Charles Dent from Pennsylvania, Fred Upton from Michigan, David Reichart from Washington, Mike Kaufman from Colorado, Chris Collins from New York, John Faso from New York, Mark Amadowi from Nevada, Elsie Stefanski from New York, Leonard Lance from New Jersey, Ryan Costello from Pennsylvania, Stephen Knight from California, and Diane DeGetti from Colorado. So they have 19 of the needed 26. Now, assuming all of the Republicans that sign on for the petition support the DREAM Act, that would easily be enough for them all to pass the DREAM Act to the Senate. And they wouldn't require an additional vote by the House to do so. They don't even need the majority to do so. They just need to have the most votes. So, yeah, if they're able to find 7 more Republicans in the House that are willing to sign this petition, they're going to push amnesty to the Senate.
Sorry, can I interject right now? I want to ask. So, even if they bring this up, the one that gets the most votes doesn't even need the majority support in order to move on to the Senate?
No.
Okay, see, that's where I was wondering about this, because if it, would that technically count as it being passed in the House?
Yes.
Okay.
It would pass the House.
It would pass in the House. It would go to the Senate. I really doubt the Senate would have enough stuff to go there. No matter what, even if somehow they did pass it, they would not have enough votes to pass that with a veto-proof majority. So Trump would definitely veto the DREAM Act. I don't think that's controversial at all to say. That being said, before you continue with what you were going to say, actually, just go ahead and say it.
Well, now the Republicans do have the slight majority in the House. You still have to worry about people like Jeff Flake and John McCain still being there. But, I mean, I'm just not happy that, amnesty is going to be passing, a House of Legislature at all. And, it's not that hard for them to do so at this point. And I just don't want the media to get so incensed around the DREAM Act potentially being there, because, this is one of those things that the Democrats want really bad, and we don't want to give them. And like you said, they don't have the veto-proof majority to do so, but I just don't think it's good that they're doing so.
And here's the thing about that, and that's part of the reason why I'm really, really, really skeptical about this whole thing in general, is because of the fact that if the rules are the way this thing shows, you don't even need majority support to pass a bill. In what other context has there ever been something passed in the House that didn't have majority support? Because if it goes to the Senate and the Senate even wants to make one single individual change to it, it has to get re-voted on in the House. You know what I'm saying? And so it would go back to the House, and that may or may not gain it more votes. You know, I follow Twitter
now,
can I continue, please? Sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah.
I know, but I just want to say, I just want to get this off my chest here. I followed this stuff extremely closely, and like you said at the beginning, it's one of those things that's not really being talked about, but I also follow what a lot of leftists say, and a lot of obscure things that leftists are talking about, and you'd think that even they would at least somewhat get excited about the possibility of this even happening. None of even them are talking about this at all, and this is something that they definitely would be mentioning. And so, granted, it says that there was a chance that it could force a vote on that. I really don't see this forcing a vote on this at all, and I really don't think that this vote is ever even going to come up and happen. I don't see it right now. There's not enough support for it, and there's not enough people talking about it, and something like this would definitely be pushed. And even people on the right aren't talking about this. People that would normally be screaming, hey, 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 point at this, look what's going on, stop your people from voting on this, even those people aren't talking about this. So, you know, rogue House Republicans following an obscure thing is about as close as it's going to get. I really don't think it has the support that it does, and by that I mean talking about this Queen of the Hill resolution itself.
Yeah.
Plus, they would need need 9 more Republicans for it. So even there, you're probably not going to get 9 more Republicans. And just because they sign the petition doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to vote yes on the bill.
No, I mean, considering, okay, so the petition, let's say that 9 Republicans do come to sign the petition. Then all the Democrats support it, so, you know, the Queen of Hill resolution, you know, Jeff Denham's thing goes to vote. If the Democrats vote in bloc, and they have the support of the people that signed the petition for the DREAM Act, then it passes.
Right.
If the Republicans split at all on any bill, which, you know, say they split between the Goodlatte bill and the Hurd bill, the DREAM Act passes.
Which is why I would say that it goes to the Senate. The Senate would definitely make at least some change. I really don't think that this is even legal to pass something without majority support in the House. Theoretically speaking, if you had, you know, say you had the 6 Republican co-signs vote for the DREAM Act, I doubt that there's going to be every single Republican that signs onto this thing is going to support the DREAM Act. That is not going to happen. But say the 6 Republican co-signs are the ones that vote for it. So you've got, what, about 202 votes yes for the DREAM Act. You know, if you're a Republican right now that actually supports the DREAM Act, you would have already came out and co-signed that thing. The DREAM Act is very unpopular amongst Republicans in the House outside of the Republicans that already do support it. So, you know, if it's just by whichever vote gets the most, so if you have 202 votes for something and then every other bill gets split and yet you have more than 202 votes against something, I just don't see the legality of that actually passing, and I really don't see this happening. As I said before, I don't think this is, you know, it says it could force a vote on the bill. You know, you tend to think that it's a strong possibility of happening. I just don't see it at all. I see the possibility that's actually going forward at less than 5%. It's just not there. It's just not going to happen. Paul Ryan is not going to allow that.
Low.
Well, I pay more attention to this stuff. Can we move on to the next story?
This overrides Paul Ryan, but yeah.
And that's the thing is, it's meant to override the Speaker of the House, but Paul Ryan's going to be gone in the next, 3 weeks anyway, so, you know, we'll see where that goes from there. In an election year with the primaries currently going on, no Republican in a close district is going to put their name behind the DREAM Act that hasn't already put their name behind the DREAM Act, which is part of the reason why I say it's just not going to happen. And if so, Trump's going to veto the damn thing.
Yeah.
Anyways, if you're someone who's listening to this, if you're someone who's listening to this, don't get your panties in a wad thinking that the DREAM Act is about to miraculously get passed without anyone realizing it's happening. It's not going to happen. Let's continue.
Yeah, so the next story that we have is half of Americans live in a sanctuary city, or under a sanctuary policy. So according to the Federation for American Immigration Reform, about half of all Americans live under a sanctuary policy that shields illegal aliens from law enforcement. FAIR calculates that there are 564 states and municipalities that with a sanctuary policy as of April 1st. That is up from more than 200 since Trump has taken office. There were only 40 when Obama took office.
That's amazing. But it just goes to show you,
yeah, you know,
it just goes to show you how far left the left is taking things right now. They, you know, the reason why there are sanctuary states and stuff popping up is essentially because of Trump. They want to protect their voting base that they have there, amongst many other things. They don't want to see Trump deporting people. Granted, that's exactly what needs to happen, is Trump deporting people. But it also goes to show you just how weak the country actually is when we are divided the way we are. I mean, we're set up under a federalist system where you have the federal government and then you have state governments. And the way things are supposed to happen is the federal government does one thing and then the states are essentially left to do everything else. And what that does is when you have states that are unified, they don't really care what each other is doing. But when you have such a divided country that we have, you have individual states trying to set their own, essentially set their own immigration policy. And that's part of the reason also while you see Trump up there at different rallies and stuff complaining about immigration policy, it's not all border security that he's talking about when he's mentioning that. A lot of what he's talking about is, you know, going after these sanctuary cities, going after sanctuary states, or just, you know, sanctuary municipalities in general. And part of the reason why is you need to make sure that these things actually get challenged in court somewhere other than the Ninth Circuit. And that's why it's also important about going forward and looking at the stuff that's currently being talked about, because we need to get the stuff to the Supreme Court, because that's one place where we do at least have the edge in terms of things like this. And, you know, I absolutely believe that, you know, sanctuary policies are unconstitutional and illegal, especially since you're trying to help aid and abet illegal aliens in this country, and that is against the law right now. So you have states and municipalities openly breaking federal immigration law, and yet it seems like there's, you know, the federal government, besides, you know, a couple of words here and there from Jeff Sessions, is completely not really trying to go after this. The reason why they're doing so is because of the whole court system, because the courts keep striking down challenges to these sanctuary policies, upholding sanctuary policies. So it definitely is something that needs to go to Supreme Court. We need to establish precedent that you cannot establish sanctuaries in this country. Or at the same time, just, you know, freaking ignore the policy. You know what? If California wants to say we're not going to let ICE in, then send ICE in. If they want to stop them, then use lethal force, you know, against anyone who's trying to stop you, because federal government law surpasses state law. It's called the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. And immigration is a federal issue, not a state issue.
Yeah. I have nothing to add on to that. You said what I believe. So let's move on to the last story with immigration. Now, that is Trump had a blow-up in the White House this week over immigration. According to 3 administration officials, President Trump berated Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen during a Wednesday cabinet immigration meeting. Trump began to lash out when told for the second consecutive month illegal crossings at the southern border topped more than 50,000. The blow-up lasted for 30 minutes, with Trump getting red in the face and yelling at Nielsen to close the border. Present were Kellyanne Conway, Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, Stephen Miller, Jeff Sessions, and Larry Kudlow. Nielsen fired back, saying that there are legal limits on what she could do, and was backed up by Attorney General Jeff Sessions. The New York Times and Politico reported that Nielsen had drafted a letter of resignation over the meeting, but that has been denied by a spokesman from the agency of Homeland Security. Nielsen has since released statements that she stands by the president and supports his decisions.
And, you know, this is one of those things that a lot of people were unsure over whether or not this actually happened, but because of the fact that, you know, Kirstjen Nielsen has released these statements, I tend to believe it actually did happen. But if so, then this is really good news, because, you know, a lot of people have been criticizing Trump over his inaction over immigration, but it shows that he is just as mad about these things as we are too. And, you know, when you have a system that's set up with the chain of command, which is exactly what we're talking about, it doesn't all lie on Trump's doorstep. A lot of it lies on Kirstjen Nielsen's doorstep as well. And so we like to be outraged and direct our outrage towards the president, which, you know, granted, that is something we need to do. If we're not also directing our outrage at Kirstjen Nielsen, then we're wasting our time. because she's the one who, granted Trump technically has final say over things. If Kristen Nielsen just isn't, doing her job up to her utmost ability, then things aren't going to get done, no matter what Trump decides or whatever Trump tells people to do. So it's really, I blame her more than I blame him for things not happening. But it just shows that, yeah, this is good news. He's angry about things. He's lashing out at her, and she needs to get her act together or get out the door.
Yeah, I'm glad that Trump is incensed over this issue. 50,000 illegal border crossings a month is unacceptable. You break that down to what we would get in a year. That's, hundreds of thousands of illegal border crossings, and we don't want that whatsoever. So, I agree with the president saying we need to close the border. With that said, let's get into some election news. There's a lot of primaries coming up this next week.
Yeah, I know last week we kind of took a little while to do this, but we're going to go pretty quickly through this. So there are 4 primaries that are coming up this Tuesday, which is May 15th, in the states of Idaho, Nebraska, Oregon, and Pennsylvania. And we're going to start with Idaho. So the first primary in Idaho is their gubernatorial primary. They don't have any Senate election in Idaho right now. So, whoa. But yeah, the first up is the Idaho gubernatorial primary. Idaho currently has a CPVI of R+19, so it's extremely unlikely that any Democrat's going to win in November. So that's the reason why we were focused on the Republican primary there. So first up, the first candidate who, last week, if you remember, I was talking about their predicted numbers and how they're trading, which essentially just gives a good indication of how people believe the outcome is going to be. The leading contender currently trading at 73 cents is Raul Labrador. He is the representative for Idaho's 1st congressional district since 2011. He's a former Idaho state representative. He's also a Mormon, and he's also a member of the House Freedom Caucus. So if he were to win, which it looks like he's going to win that primary, he's probably going to go on and win the general. So, he'd be a decent governor as far as I'm concerned. The person who's currently trading second at 20 cents is Tommy Alquist. I really couldn't find anything when I looked anything up on him. So the person who's currently in last place at 8 cents unpredicted is Brad Little, who is the current Idaho lieutenant governor. He's also a former Idaho state senator, and he owns a farming and cattle company. So I kind of find it funny that the guy who's the current lieutenant governor looks like he's going to lose in a primary for governor to a guy who's a U.S. representative. So I found that funny. There's also, let's see, 4 more people running, but they don't stand a chance, so I'm not really going to mention their names. In the Democrat primary, just in case something bad happens and the Republicans actually lose, it is important to look at who is running in these Democrat primaries as well. The first person is A.J. Balikoff, a member of the Boise School District Board of Trustees. He ran for governor of Idaho in 2014 and lost in the general election. So, hey, maybe second time's a charm, right? The second person is Paulette Jordan, a former Idaho state representative, and she actually illegally appointed someone to her seat when she resigned to run for governor. So she's got some legal battles facing her. Not going to help her in the Democratic primary. There's also one more guy running, but who cares about him? In the Idaho House races, the one district that we're going to look at is District 1, which, if you remember, is currently Raul Labrador's seat. He's retiring from that seat in order to run for governor, and it looks like he's going to win that. So this District 1 has a CPVI R+21. It is an open primary because he is leaving his district. So being at R+21, Republicans are going to win that seat. Even with, whatever blue wave you think might hit, Republicans are not going to lose that seat. So the person who's currently trading in first place is trading at 98 cents right now and predicted. So extremely high chance that this person's going to win. And this guy is Russ Fulcher. He's a former Idaho state senator. He ran for Idaho governor in 2014 and lost in the primary. He's currently been endorsed by current Representative Raul Labrador as well as Senator Ted Cruz and the company Freedom Works. So it's a very, very strong likely possibility that Russ Fulcher is going to win the Republican primary for that seat. In case he loses, the 2 other people that have a chance are actually tied for second place, both at 2 cents right now. First is Luke Malik, who's an Idaho state representative. He's only 35 years old, so he barely even qualifies for anything. Second is David Leroy. who is a former Idaho, he's the former Idaho Attorney General, he's the former Idaho Lieutenant Governor, and he also ran for Idaho Governor in 1986 but lost in the general election. He's also been out of politics since 1994, so, you know, he's not going to win it. There's also 4 more Republicans running, but they don't stand a chance. There's also 3 Democrats running, but because of the fact that it's such a Republican district, no one's really paying attention to that Democrat primary because they're not going to win. The last person I do want to mention for this District 1 race is actually a third-party candidate. Normally I don't want to waste people's time talking about third parties because they're not going to win anything, but there's one person I did want to mention. His name is Pro-Life. Yes, that is his actual name. His real name is Marvin Thomas Richardson, but he had his middle name changed to Pro-Life, literally Pro-Life, in 2004, and he currently runs for Congress and other offices under that name. He ran for U.S. Senate in 2016, lost in the Constitution Party primary. How in the world someone loses in the Constitution Party primary, I have no idea. But he also ran for Idaho Governor in 2010 and 2014, lost in the general election both times. Also ran for U.S. House in 2012, also lost in the general. So it looks like he's going to lose in the general or in the primary here yet again for Idaho. So moving on, unless you want to say anything else about Idaho before we move to Nebraska.
No.
Okay. Then moving on to Nebraska, first off, we have the Nebraska governor race. Nebraska is currently an R+14 state with the CPVI. In the Republican primary, you got Pete Ricketts, who's the incumbent, running for re-election. He's probably going to win. You know, when it comes to these races, if you have an incumbent in there, you always have to give the edge to the incumbent, unless there's something really, really, really like far out there that would cause someone to lose. But he's being challenged by Crystal Gable. And the only reason I mention her as a challenger is because she worked for the Legal Marijuana Now Party and the Nebraska Green Party. So yeah, Legal Marijuana Now Party, I would get down with that. But the Nebraska Green Party, I don't want any people part of the Green Party being in my Republican Party. So luckily, she's not going to win that. But on the Democratic side, there's really only one person who stands a chance, and that is Bob Christ. He is a Nebraska state senator. He actually used to be a Republican, but switched to independent back in September, and then switched to Democrat back in February. He's a retired U.S. Air Force veteran and also fought in Desert Storm. So it looks like Bob Christ is going to be the one who ends up winning the Democrat primary and will face Pete Ricketts in the general election in November. So if you live in Nebraska and you're listening to this, I'm sure you know more about this election than we do, but that's just a general overview of that race. Now, the Nebraska Senate race is one that we also want to look out for. You know, we're kind of focusing mostly on the Senate races right now. But in the Republican primary, we have Deb Fischer, who is the current incumbent Republican senator. Her re-election is currently trading at 87 cents on Predicted, and that's her general election re-election, not just her primary re-election. So she is, you know, very low chance of actually losing, but, you know, a primary is a primary. She's being faced by Jack Heedle, who ran for the U.S. House in 2012 and lost in the primary. He also worked as a mathematics professor at the University of Tennessee and the University of Nebraska-Omaha. He's also a U.S. Navy veteran. Also challenging Deb Fischer is Jeffrey Lynn Stein, who ran for the U.S. House in 2016 as a Libertarian, but lost in the Libertarian primary. Again, I have to say, if you're losing in third-party primaries, what makes you think you stand a chance at anything? You don't. But the last person I want to mention is Todd Watson, who ran for U.S. Senate in 2014 as an independent and then lost in the general election. There's one more person running, but who cares? Deb Fischer, incumbent senator for Nevada, or for Nebraska, sorry, not Nevada. Very, very, very strong chance that not only is she going to win her primary, she's also going to win the general election as well. But that being said, we'll look at the Democratic primary. We have Larry Marvin, who ran for U.S. Senate in 2012 and 2014, lost in the primary both times. We also have Jane Raybould, who is on the Lincoln, Nebraska City Council and also ran for Nebraska Lieutenant Governor in 2014, losing in the general election. So those are your people that are running for the Democrat seat for that. Doesn't look like we have a very strong list of candidates there. So Deb Fischer, chances at re-election, very, very high. The only House race that we want
I don't really have a problem with her.
No, she's normally a reliable vote for things we like. I've never really heard her to be someone who's kind of been a dissenting vote for anything we don't like. So focusing on the only district in Nebraska that we want to look at is House District 2. which currently has a CPVI of R+4, so, a slight edge to the Republicans, but, still could go either way. This is one of the closest districts in the country. In 2016, Trump won that district by only 2 points, whereas incumbent Republican Representative Don Bacon only won by 1 point. So Trump actually outperformed the Republican nominee in that district. In 2012, Romney won the district by 7 points, but in 2008, Obama won the district by 1 point. Which is why if you look at an election map from 2008, you'll see that one electoral vote from Nebraska actually went towards Obama, and that is because he won that district. Because Nebraska splits its electoral votes based on who wins each congressional district. So, if we're going to lose any districts, chances are this is going to be one of those House seats that we actually lose. In the Republican primary, Don Bacon, your incumbent, is running unopposed right now, so he's going to win that primary. But in terms of his general election possibility, his re-election is currently trading at 48% in the general election right now. So, 48%. Honestly, that's one of those flip-flop. It could go either way. It would not surprise me if he lost. It would also not surprise me if he won. I will just say that, like I said before, if you're going to lose any House seats, this is probably one that you stand the greatest chance of losing. That being said, we need to look at the people that have the possibility of beating Don Bacon, and that is in your Democrat primary. First up, you have Brad Ashford, who is a former U.S. representative for District 2. He held this House seat, from 2015 to 2017, and then Don Bacon won it and has been serving in it so far. So Brad Ashford's the guy who Don Bacon upset in the 2016 election. He's also a former Nebraska state senator, two-time state senator, served from 87 to 95 and then 06 to 15. He's currently trading at 93 cents in the Democratic primary, so very good chance that that guy is going to be the one who faces Don Bacon in general. So when you have your current guy versus your guy who used to be in the position, it could go either way. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me. I would give the edge to incumbents, but because it is a general election year and the opposing party tends to do better in the House, I would probably say that Brad Ashford, the Democrat, might actually stand a good chance of winning his district back for the Democrats. But the other person facing him in the Democrat primary is only trading at 7 cents, so very low chance of her actually going forward. She is Kara Eastman, and the only thing we know about her is she founded the Omaha Healthy Kids Alliance, which is a nonprofit poisoning prevention organization. So good for her, trying to keep poison out of the kids. But, chances of winning this House district race in the primary for the Democrats, very low for her. So that's one of the district races that we do want to actually keep our mind and our eyes on moving forward. Next up, the state that we have is Oregon. I'll try to go through this pretty quick. Oregon has the governor race, CPVI D+5. Your incumbent Democrat governor is Kate Brown. She's got two people facing her in the primary, but they're not going to win, so she's going to continue to be, she's going to win her primary. In the Republican primary, there's actually a lot of people running for the governor's seat, but I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. There isn't any predicted numbers I have on these people, so I'm just kind of going to go in alphabetical order. Most of these people I couldn't really find any information on, in fact, most of them, so I'm just going to focus on the top three that I personally think have this greatest chance at winning. So first off is Newt Bueller. He is an Oregon State representative. He actually resigned his seat in order to run for governor. He also ran for Oregon Secretary of State in 2012, but lost in the general election. He also works as an orthopedic surgeon. The next person we have up is Sam Carpenter, who ran for U.S. Senate in 2016, but lost in the Republican primary. And finally, we have Bruce Cuff, who ran for Oregon governor in 2014 and 2016, but lost both times in the general election. So hopefully they don't, again, nominate this guy to lose for a third time. Would not be good. He's also a U.S. Army veteran and works as a real estate broker. So hopefully, if you're an Oregon person on the Republicans that's going to vote in your primary, you don't vote for Bruce Cuff because, granted they say third time's a charm, it's not going to work this time. Hopefully they support someone else. But there's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other people that are running in the Republican primary that I did not mention there. But all of them, they really don't have much on their plate. They don't stand a chance. Oregon does not have a Senate race, so we will move on now to a couple of House races. There's two races that we want to look at in Oregon. And the reason why we want to look at them, first off, is House District 4. The CPVI for this district is even. So, according to that, equal chance that Republicans or Democrats could win it. Trump lost that district by only 554 votes. That is the closest margin in the entire country for a district. Yet the Democratic candidate, who was Peter DeFazio, who's the incumbent there, he won that district in 2016 55% to 40%. Yet Trump only lost the district to Clinton by 554 votes. What that shows is that they either had a very unpopular Republican candidate in the general election, or it shows that Hillary Clinton was not that popular than Peter DeFazio. But Peter DeFazio is seeking his 17th consecutive term in Congress, the longest in Oregon history, okay? 17 times 2, that would be, if he wins again and serves another term, he'd be in Congress for 34 years, okay? Talk about trying to drain the swamp and talk about wanting term limits. But he's running against another guy, and let's face it, when you're 17-termer, or when you've served 16 terms in Congress, you're not going to lose your Democratic primary. But Republicans are trying to win this for the simple reason that, yeah, it's the guy's 17th term. Trump barely lost the district, and it has a CPVI of even. So, good chance Republicans might have a chance at winning this district. However, I would still try to give the edge to the incumbent Democrat. But that being said, on the Republican side, the person who's trading in first place is at 57 cents, and that is Kurt Boyce. He is on the Curry County Board of Commissioners. He also is a strong supporter of Trump's immigration policies. So if this guy wins his primary and somehow wins in the general election, he'd be a solid vote for our side when it comes to immigration stuff. Facing him in the primary is also Art Robinson. Now, Art Robinson is he founded the Oregon Institute of Science and Medicine. He is currently trading at 43 cents on Predicted in second place for the Republican primary. And here's why I hope this guy doesn't win. He ran for the U.S. House in 2008, 2012, 2014, and 2016, losing in the general election every single time. Do we really want to nominate someone who's going to lose in the general election for a fifth time in the same district? I don't think so. It is time for a change. Don't vote for Art Robinson. But in third place at 7 cents, very low chance of winning the primary, is Jo Rae Perkins. She does support President Trump strongly. However, she ran for U.S. House in 2016 and lost in the primary, and ran for U.S. Senate in 2014 and also lost in the primary. So it looks like she's going to lose in a U.S. House primary yet again. So hopefully Kurt Boyce can go on to win his primary, and then we'll support him in the general election. Now, moving on to the next district is House District 5, which also has a CPVI of even. The incumbent Democrat there is Kurt Schrader. He's facing Peter Wright in the Democrat primary. Peter Wright is a U.S. Navy veteran and is also very anti-gun. So, granted, I don't like Democrats winning, but if we can make sure that super anti-gun Democrats lose in their primaries to more normal type Democrats, if that's even a word that can be used, I hate to say it, I'm rooting for Kurt Schrader to win his re-election chances here, at least in the primary, that is. Now, in the general election, there's a couple of Republicans running. First off is Mark Callahan. He ran for U.S. Senate in 2016 and lost in the general election. He also ran for U.S. Senate in 2014 but lost in the primary. He ran for the Oregon House of Representatives in 2012 and lost in the general. So this guy has a history of losing races, so maybe not the best candidate there. He's facing off against Joey Nations. The only thing I could find about Joey Nations was that he's a big fan of Representative Steve King and former Representative and presidential candidate Ron Paul. So I would say hopefully Joey Nations can pull off a win in that Republican primary there. So if you happen to live in Oregon's 5th Congressional District and you're listening to this before Tuesday, I would support Joey Nations. There's one more person running in the Republican primary for that district, but they don't really matter at all. But before we move on to Pennsylvania, do you want to say anything else about these Oregon races we talked about?
Yeah, I think it's surprising how competitive these potential winning in them, where, Oregon generally isn't a very red state, but in the rural districts, it's more so.
Yeah, so let's move on to Pennsylvania. Now, the Pennsylvania governor or gubernatorial election here, the state of Pennsylvania has a CPVI of even as well. We know Trump won Pennsylvania, very low margin, but still shows that Republicans can win statewide there. So, in the Democratic primary, current incumbent Democrat Governor Tom Wolf is running unopposed, so he's going to win his primary and then go on to face whoever the Republican is in the general election. In the Republican primary, though, there is a couple of people running. First off is Scott Wagner. He is a Pennsylvania state senator, and he was also the first write-in candidate to ever win election to the Pennsylvania State Senate. That happened back in 2014, so, it's very rare that a write-in candidate wins, like, big statewide offices like that, but hey, he won it, so good for him. He's also currently trading at 91 cents on Predicted for the Republican primary, so very, very strong chance he ends up winning that primary. But facing him is Paul Mango. You can make all the jokes you want about his last name. He's a U.S. Army veteran, also a West Point grad. He's the former director of the consulting firm McKinsey, which I've recognized that name, is the only reason I wrote it down here. He's only trading at 9 cents right now, so probably not going to win. There's also one more person running, but, they don't stand a chance. So it looks like it's probably going to be Scott Wagner versus Tom Wolf in the Pennsylvania gubernatorial election this coming November. Now, Pennsylvania has a Senate race. This is one of the Senate races where it is a blue or a Democrat that is running for re-election in a state that Trump won. This is one of the ones we are focused on. Again, CPVI is even right now. The incumbent Democrat senator is Bob Casey. He is currently running unopposed, so he will be on the ballot in November. And the persons facing him in the Republican primary is, first off, Lou Barletta, who is the representative for Pennsylvania's 11th district. He's also on the executive committee of Trump's transition team, also endorsed Trump back in the primary. And, that's important because a lot of people were skeptical about endorsing Trump even in the general election, but he went out and he was a Trump supporter almost from the very beginning. He also has a Numbers USA immigration grade of an A+ right now. And also, there's one story I want to tell about Lou Barletta. In 2006, when he was the mayor of Hazleton, Pennsylvania, he passed an ordinance that fined landlords $1,000 a day for providing housing to illegal immigrants. Granted that ordinance was struck down in 2007, the fact that it shows just how far he's willing to go on immigration is great, considering that immigration is the #1 priority for Republicans right now. So if Lou Barletta wins his primary, he's currently trading at 98 cents on Predicted in the Republican primary, so he's going to win that primary. He would be a strong Republican senator for us in Pennsylvania, definitely on our side when it comes to immigration issues. So we need to make sure that once he wins his primary, we definitely get on board with doing everything we can to make sure that Lou Barletta wins that Senate seat in November. But
I personally am very familiar with Lou Barletta and many of the legislations that he's tried to pass. He tried to pass a bill against sanctuary cities that was very good. Didn't pass the House or anything, but introduced. But, if he were to beat Bob Casey, he would probably be the best Trump Republican senator in the Senate.
Oh, absolutely. So, he's definitely the person that we're getting behind in that Senate race there in Pennsylvania. But moving on, he is facing Jim Christiana in the Republican primary. Jim Christiana is only trading at 2 cents on Predicted, so he's not going to win. Jim Christiana is just a Pennsylvania state representative. So, other than that, that's pretty much where the Democrat and Republican primary stands for the Pennsylvania Senate. Now, there are a couple of districts that we want to look at in Pennsylvania. Both of these districts, and I'm just going to say this before we actually talk about these. If you remember Enzo, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled that they wanted to redraw the congressional districts in Pennsylvania. I'm just going to flat out say this because it's the truth. Because of redistricting alone, Republicans are going to lose at least 3 seats in Pennsylvania to Democrats. Granted, whatever happens across the country, because of redistricting, that's going to happen, which is very, very unfortunate. But the first district that we want to look at is District 4, which is an open primary. It's actually a new district that has been formed because of the court ordered redistricting from old District 13. District 13 had a CPVI of D+15, so it's not like it's going to change much. It's going to be held as a Democrat seat, but because it's an open primary, Democrats and Republicans, technically speaking, both have a chance at winning it. In the Republican primary is Dan David. He's running unopposed. Could not find anything on him. But we're not going to win that House seat at all. It's going to be a blue seat. But in terms of the people who are running in the Democrat primary, running first place is at 93 cents unpredicted, so this person's going to win the Democrat primary, is Madeleine Dean. She is a Pennsylvania state representative. Coming in second place is Shira Goodman at 11 cents unpredicted. Couldn't find anything else about her. But in third place is Joe Hoffel. He's only trading at 5 cents, so he's not going to win. But he's a former member of the Montgomery County Board of Commissioners, former United States Representative from 1999 to 2005, also a former Pennsylvania State Representative. He also ran for Pennsylvania Governor in 2010, but lost in the primary. Also ran for U.S. House in 2004, lost in the general election. So it looks like that guy's going to lose in this primary as well. So House District 4, yeah, Republicans are not going to win that in November, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Now, House District 7 is the other district that we want to move. This is the last race that we're going to cover before we go on to more stuff here in the podcast. House District 7 is also a new district that was formed because of redistricting, mostly out of old District 15. District 15 was an R+7 in its CPVI. Now, they haven't actually measured this district yet, but the estimate that new District 7 is going to be D+1. So this is one of those races that normally we would easily win the race, but it's a very good chance that we probably might lose this race as well, especially if Democrats are able to, outshine Republicans by even a very small margin. So this is a race that looks like this is a seat that we're going to lose. But in the Republican primary, trading in first place at 97 cents, so your likely Republican primary winner, is Marty Nothstein. He is the Lehigh County Commissioner. He was also an Olympic cyclist, winning a silver medal in 1996 and also winning a gold medal in 2000. Marty supports term limits and promises to only serve 8 years in Congress. So if the Republican, if Marty Nothstein was to win the general election in November, you're looking at only a 4-term person there. So, it would be an open primary in 8 years. But facing Marty in the Republican primary is Dean Browning, who is the former Lehigh County Commissioner. So we got the current guy versus the old guy. He's also the chief financial officer of an aviation company, but he's only trading at 11 cents right now unpredicted. So Dean Browning probably not going to win that Republican primary. Now, in the Democrat primary, again, it's important to focus on the Democrats as well because they're probably going to end up winning this district in November. But this is actually a very close race. First off, and trading in first place at 38 cents is John Morganelli. He is the Northampton County District Attorney since 1992. He labels himself as a moderate Democrat, but he actually has supported Trump's immigration policies so far almost 100%. So even if he went on to win and become the person that represents that district in Congress, we might actually have someone on the Democrat side that would be open to some sort of our type of style immigration policies that we might want to see a possible dissenting Democrat vote. So, the only good thing about him right there. And he's also currently trading in first place, so he might actually win. But this is going to be a close race for the Democrats. In second place at 32 cents, keep in mind first place was 38 cents, so you can see how close it is Susan Wild. She's currently the solicitor of Allentown, Pennsylvania. She's a former attorney. She's also endorsed by the pro-abortion group called Emily's List. So if you're someone who's anti-abortion out there, you probably don't want to see her win. But in third place, currently trading at 29 cents. So we got 38 cents in first, 32 cents in second, and 29 cents in third. Again, you can see exactly how close that race actually is right now in the Democrats. But it is Greg Edwards. He's the pastor of a church. He's also a progressive socialist. He's been endorsed by Bernie Sanders, Justice Democrats, and the Congressional Progressive Caucus. So he is definitely someone who we do not want to see in Congress at all. So hopefully he loses in the Democrat primary here to the moderate Democrat that actually supports Trump's policies on immigration, known as John Morganelli. So it's probably going to end up being Marty Nothstein as the Republican versus John Morganelli as the Democrat for that district in November. Just looking forward. But that being said, that is our upcoming primaries for this week. Do you have anything to say about these Pennsylvania races, Enzo?
I really hope Lou Barletta wins.
Absolutely.
Because that would be amazing.
He's going to win his primary, so we'll get behind him for.
He will win
November.
the primary.
Yeah, absolutely. But anyway, so that's what that being said, and let's move on to our next story for immigration, or not immigration, for the elections that isn't covering primaries.
Yes, and that is the Democrat midterm advantage is nearly gone. The blue wave, as they talk about.
More like
according
the
to the
blue
latest
fizzle.
CNN.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
It's all good. According to the latest CNN poll, the Democrats' lead of Republicans in the 2018 midterm is within the margin of sampling error. The poll shows Democrats leading Republicans on the generic ballot 47 to 44. It also shows 31% of people believe the U.S. is better off with Democrats in control of Congress compared to 30% for Republicans. 34%, including 48% of independents, say it doesn't matter which party controls Congress. CNN poll shows that Democrats' lead has dropped from 16 points in February to 6 points in March to only 3 points now. In March, 36% of Republicans were enthusiastic about voting in the midterms, up to 44% now.
And that is part of the reason why the Democrats' lead has dropped, is because of the voter enthusiasm among Republicans going up. Now, currently as it stands, Democrats actually beat Republicans in the enthusiasm gap by double digits, 54 to 44 right now, in terms of, what percentage of Democrats and what percentage of Republicans are enthusiastic about voting in the midterms. But the fact that Republicans are becoming more enthusiastic about these really, really is the reason. That's entirely the reason that, the Democrat lead over Republicans in the generic ballot is dropping. I mean, if you go back to that statistic that we just showed, 31% of people believe the U.S. is better off with Democrats in control of Congress, only 30% for Republicans. That's essentially split down the middle, okay? So that way it could go either way. And, there's been that study that I think that one guy said that in order for Democrats to actually win back the House in November, they'd have to win the generic ballot by like 11 points or something like that due to just the districting advantages that Republicans currently have. So, if you're worried about if you're worried about the Republicans losing control of the House, it's very unlikely. We are going to lose, I've estimated around a dozen-ish House seats, although it's possible we might actually win a couple here and there, which might cancel some of those out. I'm just talking about net loss. I know that in the Senate, we're looking at a net gain of at least 3, maybe 4. I think it's unlikely we'll win higher than that, but we'll at least get a few more Republican senators. But yeah, so it's great to see that the Democrat lead is dropping over Republicans. The fact that it's in the margin of sampling error, I would say Republicans might even have the lead right now, depending on, just if you look more at the internal, how the internal breakdown of that poll was. I haven't personally looked at it, but I'd like to check it out. So that's pretty much what I have to say about that.
But yeah, in the Senate, as we've said many times, that's not anywhere we have any concern. It's the House. The magic number is 24 that the Democrats need to get the majority. But, I've mentioned this statistic many times as well. If the Democrats sort of win every single House district that Clinton won and every single district that Trump won by within 5 points, that's still not enough districts to take majority in the House. So their struggle to win the House is a lot harder than they perceive it to be.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So, it's not really too much to be worried about per se. If anything, it's stuff to be happy about, the fact that the Democrat lead is dropping. So, good news for us. Now,
yeah.
Going on to kind of an update from last week. Last week there were primaries in North Carolina, Indiana, Ohio, and what was the other state? Do you remember? Ohio, Indiana, North Carolina, and West Virginia. I'm literally looking at it right now. Those were the primaries last week. We didn't really cover the results of those primaries, except for one that we do want to focus on, and that is that West Virginia Senate race. Again, a Democrat senator that's running for re-election in a state that Trump won by big numbers, and that is to replace Joe Manchin. So, according to a new poll by WPA Intelligence, Republican candidate Patrick Morrisey, who ended up winning the Republican primary there, is beating incumbent Democrat Joe Manchin for the West Virginia U.S. Senate seat. The poll shows Morrisey beating Manchin 46 to 44. More importantly is this statistic that was taken from the poll. It shows that 51% of West Virginians suggest that it was, quote, time for a new person to be in the U.S. Senate. Ever since last Tuesday's primary, Morrissey has since been endorsed by Senators Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, as long as Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker, Sebastian Gorka, and Tea Party Patriots President Jenny Beth Martin. So, I mean, hey, we have an immediate poll showing that Manchin's probably, not probably, but stands a good chance of losing to Morrissey here. I mean, we're going to get behind Morrissey. He is our Republican candidate for the West Virginia Senate seat. So the only person who's going to be able to defeat Joe Manchin is him. So he's our guy right now.
Yeah. Not that I dislike Manchin at all. He's probably the best Democrat in the Senate. But it's just such a red state. It's going to be hard for him. Even though he has good approval numbers in West Virginia, it's about time a Republican takes that seat, though. So it'll likely be Morrissey in November winning.
Definitely. So I think that pretty much closes us out for elections, and we can move on to the other news.
Yeah, let's get on to the bottom of the stack news for national. So the first thing that we want to talk about was Schneiderman.
Yes, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman announced his resignation Monday night, just hours after the New Yorker magazine published allegations from 4 women who accused him of physical abuse and controlling behavior. Schneiderman has been a strong critic of President Trump and has also cast himself as a supporter of the #MeToo movement. The women all accuse him of being an alcoholic who would drink 2 bottles of wine a night, then bring a bottle of scotch into the bedroom, being plastered 5 nights out of 7. One of his accusers, a Sri Lankan woman whose last name I can't pronounce so I didn't write it down, said Schneiderman would call her his brown slave and tasked her with finding another woman for a threesome after physically abusing her in bed, also asking her to call him master. One of the women has also claimed that Schneiderman told her, "If you ever leave me, I'd kill you." A number of the women that the Sri Lankan told her story to advised her to keep the story to herself, arguing that Schneiderman was too valuable a politician for the Democrats to lose. So, this story, it broke up Monday. I mean, it came out Monday night, and it just exploded. No one was talking about him earlier in the day. It kind of the story broke like early mid-afternoon, and just like 2 or 3 hours later, you were seeing that he was announcing his resignation. And God, I mean, were you paying attention to the internet on Monday night when this story first came out?
I do remember the kind of hysteria around the Schneiderman stuff, just because it's so evident how hypocritical this critic of Trump and supporter of the Me Too movement is. And there was also the kind of foreboding tweet from years ago, President Trump criticizing Schneiderman, that kind of alluded to him being, this terrible guy. And it's kind of funny now that, Nostradamus Trump predicted this all years ago.
Yeah, it's, that conspiracy theory that Trump has a time machine, maybe it is accurate. Who knows? But that was I kind of thought that if it weren't for the Iran deal being rescinded by President Trump, this would probably be the biggest story of the week.
It would have been top, but there was just so much stuff this week that just took precedent. But if this was last week, this would have been near the top, though.
Oh, absolutely. But it's important, the fact that he's gone. Whether frankly, I don't care the reason. Yeah, the guy's a hypocrite. He abused women. He should be gone from his seat. But he was the Attorney General for the state of New York, okay? That is one of the most powerful political positions in the entire country that isn't working for the federal government, okay? The fact that he is gone deals a huge blow to the hashtag resistance that's out there, because he was like their guy in terms of, filing lawsuits and suing the Trump administration for this, that, and stuff. But now he's gone, okay? And so that really, really hurts their ability to move forward. It also hurts the Democrats' credibility as well, because a lot of people, if Trump knew about it from his cryptic tweets, We know that at least these 4 women knew about it. We know that these 4 women told people about it. I mean, it's on the record that they've said that he's too valuable a politician for the Democrats to lose, so don't tell anyone about what happened to you. Just, yeah, it's a bad thing that he did to you, but just let it go. Okay, if Trump knew about this, then the other question is who else knew about this? Did Senator Gillibrand from New York know about it? Did Chuck Schumer know about it? Did Governor Cuomo know about it? Did Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York City know about it? And so it's one of those things where that just really doesn't help the Democrats at all, especially just the more so the New York ones than the national Democrats. But yeah, definitely a not really a death blow, but just a very big hit to them, and they've fallen down, and chances are it's gonna be tough for them to get back up from this one.
Yeah. Let's move on now to some stuff in regards to opioids.
So, yeah, we've got a couple of good stories here about the opioid epidemic and things that are being done. And first things first, according to the Justice Department, a record close to 1 million pounds of potentially dangerous, expired, unused, and unwanted prescription drugs were collected for Drug Take-Back Day. This happened earlier this week, or it might have happened last week, but they just reported the numbers this week. But Texas and California ranked number 1 and number 2 in the country, respectively, with the largest amount of collections. The 2 states alone collected over 150,000 pounds of those opioids. During his weekly address on April 27th, President Trump said, quote, "We have to get really, really tough, really nasty, whatever it takes, because we have to keep them out of our country and out of our communities," referring to dangerous opioid drugs. According to the DEA, 115 Americans die of an opioid overdose every single day. So this is good news. I know that they like to use the Drug Take-Back Day as, almost like a national holiday to try to get people off of dangerous opioids that are killing them. I know we've talked about the opioid epidemic many times here on the program, so we're definitely happy to see things like this happening.
Yeah, and this connects with our next story as well, and that is Walmart's taking action against opioid prescriptions that are excessive.
That's right. Walmart announced Monday that they will begin restricting opioid prescriptions to help stem the deadly drug epidemic. Walmart and Sam's Club pharmacies will limit customers' opioid prescriptions to a 7-day supply and a maximum of 50 milligrams per day. The move is in line with new CDC regulations, which suggest 3 days or less will often be sufficient, and more than 7 days will rarely be needed. And for prescriptions for less than 7 days, Walmart has said that they are going to follow individual state laws regarding those things. Walmart has also said that by January of 2020, their pharmacies will require e-prescriptions for controlled substances, which will pretty much, make sure the people that aren't supposed to be getting prescriptions for opioids are not getting those prescriptions. So, people don't realize this, but Walmart is, I think, either the largest or one of the largest drug prescribers in the nation. You can go to any Walmart in the country.
They're up there.
You can go to any Walmart in the country and walk over to their pharmacy aisle, and no matter, as long as it's not like 2 o'clock in the morning, you're going to see people waiting in their pharmacy. They've got benches by them for a reason. You're seeing people over there. This is where a lot of people go to get their opioids or, and other prescription drugs, especially in Appalachia, which is where the opioid crisis has hit those areas hardest. So, I'm glad to see that Walmart and Walmart and Sam's Club, pretty much, just Walmart, since they own Sam's Club. It's nice to see that they are doing their own effort to limit the opioid crisis as much as they possibly can. So good for you, Walmart. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Moving on to some news about an individual that was probably on some pretty heavy prescription drugs, or maybe got off them. That is Nicholas Cruz has been confirmed that he was referred to the Promise program. Broward County school officials are now admitting that Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz has been assigned to the Promise program, an Obama-era school discipline program that encourages teachers and principals to not report threatening and assaultive behavior of minority students to law enforcement in order to appear non-discriminatory and shrink the school-to-prison pipeline. The Obama administration threatens school districts with the possibility of federal investigation and loss of funding if their statistics show disproportionately more minority students arrested and suspended. Tracy Clark, a spokeswoman for Broward Superintendent Robert Runcie, said that the district placed him on the Promise program after his vandalism of a middle school bathroom on November 25th, 2013. During middle school, Cruz racked up nearly 24 offenses and was transferred into an intensive behavioral management school, all without ever getting an arrest record. Previously, both Runcie and the Broward Sheriff's Office said publicly that Cruz did not attend the program. So this is something that we've been speculating from the very get-go of this whole Nicholas Cruz thing. We learned about this Promise program and the soft on crime initiatives that were in place there that was encouraged by the Obama administration. And to think, if there was no Promise program, if he had been referred to the police for all these different offenses that he racked up as, a minor, he might have had an arrest record that would have prevented him from being able to purchase a firearm, and he wouldn't have been able to do the mass shooting. So, they always want to say, oh, we need to have all this gun control to stop these events. No, if you didn't have programs like this, there would have been no Nicholas Cruz. He would have been dealt with like he should have been.
Yeah, and it pisses me off, especially since, both the superintendent and the Broward County Sheriff's Office publicly stated that he wasn't in the program. And, I don't think I attribute that to them just not knowing. They lied. Okay, they straight up lied to the public about this. And
yes,
when you have 17 people that are killed in a shooting, and you're trying to figure out what led the shooter to do that, and you're trying to figure out how do you stop these things from happening, first off, if you have someone who shows signs of, not wanting to obey the rules, when you have someone who, what they say, nearly 24 offenses during middle school and being placed in an intensive behavior management school, okay, that's red flag for this kid isn't a safe person to let into your general population of your student body, okay? This guy, we know he was bullied. He was probably bullied for different reasons. He might have had some sort of mental health issues. We're still finding that sort of stuff out. But that being said, he was not the type of kid that is a peaceful person, and he is not the type of kid that should have been allowed to just, walk free without ever getting a arrest record. He definitely should have been taken care of. He should have been taken care of years ago. I mean, November 25th, 2013, God, that's over 4 years ago when he was in middle school. You should have tackled this situation a very long time ago. And who knows how many more students are just like him that don't have arrest records that one day might go off and do mass shootings or school shootings or just, general crime. Just general crime, vandalisms or
and
rapes or anything.
Under the Promise program, they were required to reduce school arrests of students every single year of the program.
Yeah.
And they did it by not arresting anyone. Crime was rampant in these schools. Gangs knew that they wouldn't be arrested for these things because they thought it was best to keep these things in-house. And it's not.
Yeah, and I was going to say, thinking back to when I was in high school, I never heard about this program. I'm sure it probably was at my school when I was there. I mean, if he was put in the program, back in 2013, I mean, I was still...
It wasn't everywhere, then, but many schools have similar programs to this.
I think, luckily, my high school didn't have a program like this because, dude, we were arresting people left and right for stuff, so, Anyways.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's good to know that this information has finally come forward.
Yeah. Let's go on now to the last story before your college craziness, and that is about the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts of America, 1 week after changing their name to be more inclusive and allow female and transgenders to join, has seen a large drop-off in membership. The Boy Scouts lost 425,000 members because the Mormon Church decided to end their 105-year partnership with the organization. This is nearly 1 in 5 of all Boy Scouts. Their relationship will be officially ended on December 31st of 2019.
So yeah, not good for the Boy Scouts. That's what you get for doing things people don't like. You lose a fifth of your people. And, you know, I'm not the biggest fan of the Mormon Church out there, but I got to applaud them. You know, I will give credit where credit is due. Thank you very much for ending your relationship with the former Boy Scouts of America. Now what's it called? The Scouts BSA?
Yes.
Or whatever it's called.
Even though, you know, BSA, obviously, that stands for Boy Scouts of America. But, you know, because they wanted to be so inclusive, they're losing all these members. And, that 425,000 is purely the Mormon Church. That's not even including people that are leaving on their own, accord.
No.
And this will continue. This is only 1 week after. We've pretty much seen the end of the Boy Scouts in America as we know it. I mean, we've already changed the name. It's not for boys anymore. What's the point?
At least the Girl Scouts is staying the Girl Scouts, so they'll keep selling us our cookies. Our very delicious, scrumptious cookies.
Yeah. With that said, let's get into some current year college craziness.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic. You're fucking a white male!
The assumption that women are naturally better caregivers is part of patriarchy.
Die, cis, scum.
You will not divide us! You will not divide us! You will not divide us! You will not divide us!
It's time for some current year college craziness.
Current year college craziness segment of the show where we talk about the crazy stuff that happens on college campuses here and abroad, but predominantly here because we just got the craziest of the crazy, and we're going to go to the craziest school pretty much that we talk about every single week to start off the show, and that's UC Berkeley.
So if you remember last week, UC Berkeley, we talked about how they were considering cutting the funding to the college Republicans. We have an update on that story. So in a follow-up from last week, the University of California, Berkeley student government has rescinded a proposal that would have reallocated all college Republicans' funding to the Black Student Union, citing legal concerns. Dan Moguloff, assistant vice chancellor for UC Berkeley, said the following, quote, "I have no idea what the senator who proposed the idea was referring to when he claimed the BCR, Berkeley College Republicans, has violated campus policies. As far as the university's administration is concerned, the Berkeley College Republicans is a valued student organization in good standing." So, they will keep their funding. Very good news. And that student senator that wrote that thing, he was crazy. We knew he was crazy. Unfortunately, he's probably not going to get punished for being crazy. But yeah, it just goes to show you how the university is like, the college Republicans did nothing wrong. I have no idea what you're talking about. And, they cited legal concerns. It was obviously they were being targeted for their political beliefs and no other reason. So, they probably would have faced a ton of lawsuits had they actually cut their funding. So, good thing that they didn't. Other than that, I'm ready to move on to the next story. So, unless you have anything to say.
Okay, so we can go on. The next story is at George Washington University.
Yes. Students, I'll just say it. A petition calling on George Washington University to adopt a new mascot and nickname has gathered more than 200 signatures from students. They claim their current mascot, which was adopted in 1926, representing George Washington, and their nickname, the Colonials, have too deep a connection to colonization, and they argue that it glorifies the act of systematic oppression. The petition also suggests a name change to the alternative, and the names that they suggest include the Hippos, the Revolutionaries, and the Ride Horses. The petition needs to reach 500 signatures in order to force a response from the Student Association. So yeah, George Washington University students want to take away George Washington as their mascot. How crazy does that sound?
Yeah, and if you don't know, George Washington University is in Washington, D.C. But, I just find it so weird that they think that the nickname Colonials is like an oppressive thing. Do they forget that we used to be a colony? Like our country's history started as colonies and then we became a country.
Oh no, they absolutely remember it. They just hate it because they hate everything to do with colonialism. But anyways.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Hopefully they don't reach the 500 signatures, and if they do, hopefully the Student Association tells them to just screw off.
Yeah. Let's go on to the next story, and that is Catholic University opens up Muslim sex-segregated prayer space. St. Ambrose University, a Catholic university in Davenport, Iowa, is opening a new sex-segregated prayer space Tuesday for Muslim students. The move is supposedly to honor a former world religions professor, Joe DeFrancisco, who died last summer after working at the school for 25 years. Matt Mahoney, a senior student, said he, quote, wanted to make sure DeFrancisco's legacy of interfaith education lived on, so he met last fall with the university's Saudi Student Association, Jesus Christ, to turn an idea of DeFrancisco's into reality. Mahoney worked with the Saudi Student Association to design a space specifically for students of the Islamic faith. Some of the features include sinks for ritual foot washing and separate areas for male and female worshippers, since the Islamic tradition calls for different prayer areas for each sex.
Why is a Catholic university letting Muslim students in? That's a legitimate question I have. And if they are, like, don't you think they'd want to keep that to themselves?
Yeah, not only are they allowed in, they have a Saudi Student Association.
Yeah, literally advocating on these people's behalf. I mean, if I, as a Christian, went to a Muslim university in, like, you know, Saudi Arabia for some reason, do you think I would have any success asking for any sort of, like, Christian privilege at all? Absolutely not. And yet here we are in our country, you know, or at least, you know, here we are at a Catholic university letting these Muslim students that don't even prescribe to the same religion as the university essentially let themselves dictate policy. And this is dictating policy. This is giving them, you know, more space than they previously had. The reason why they called for this to begin with was because they said they didn't have enough room to do it beforehand. Well, maybe you didn't have enough room for it beforehand because you shouldn't have been there. Okay? If you're a Muslim and you want to go to a university, you should be going to something other than a Catholic university. That kind of sounds very contradictory to your own religion. That's really all I have to say about that.
Or even, like say in the hypothetical, okay, in San Antonio they have Trinity University. That's a Catholic university. You don't necessarily have to be a Catholic to go to it.
But you should honor and respect the traditions of where you're at.
Yeah, it's a part of the institution. It's the foundation of the institution. But to want to impose this just bizarre, contradictory thing on it, it's so stupid that they allow this to happen.
Yeah, so, I don't know. I'm ready to move on.
Let's continue, though. Yeah.
Now we're moving on to Colorado.
Yeah, this one kind of... It's strange. Okay, the University of Colorado Springs is offering students 3 credits to implement an 11-part Witnessing Whiteness workshop series to become whiteness educators in their home communities. The full name of the course is Witnessing Whiteness, the Need to Talk About Race and How to Do It. According to Shelley Tokluck, the program's creator, characteristics of white culture include, quote, individualism, consumerism, meritocracy as an ideal, superficiality, competition, ambition, productivity, and extreme exploitation of labor and resources for profit. The goal of the workshop is to transform the current dominant form of white culture into an anti-racist white culture that regularly names and dismantles racism and white privilege. The same school severed ties with its Unmasking Whiteness conference last week, also created by Tokluck, after campus reform reported that attendance was limited only to self-identifying white people.
Self-identifying white people. So, what does that actually mean? Does that mean if
you would call yourself white?
So if a non-white person identifies as white, they could go? And if a white person identifies as not white, then they wouldn't be allowed to go. That makes sense to me.
So, yeah. The whole, like, characteristics of white culture part, some of these just don't make any sense. Well, most of them don't. Like, superficiality? How did they even derive that as a characteristic of white culture? That just seems as like a judgment of white people from someone that is hostile towards whites.
Yeah, I mean, the definition of superficiality is lack of thoroughness, depth of character, or serious thought, okay? Lack of those things. So it's like,
yeah,
lack of character, lack of serious thought, lack of thoroughness. I don't know how you say that's white culture, if anything. I would say it's the opposite of that.
Yeah, and how is that, like, how did they derive that as indicative of whites as a whole? I mean, you know, it's a broad scope of so many different people with different personal characteristics, and these are all characteristics that, you know, are very definitive towards people individually, and yet this is still something as a broad scope of whites. Like, the whole, like, extreme exploitation of labor and resources for profit. That is a white characteristic. But, you know, if you talked about that to just any white person you see on the street, they wouldn't, you know, likely associate themselves with that.
No, absolutely not.
They wouldn't see that as a characteristic of themselves. It just seems like a judgment made by someone that doesn't like white people.
No, it definitely isn't. I mean, that Tokluk chick, this is her second time that she's had, you know, if you want to use the word anti-white conferences, so, you know, looks like she's only trying to continue that.
Is she white herself, or?
I don't know. Probably. Who knows?
Yeah. Let's go on to the next story, though. And that is, Rutgers is teaching students to empathize with illegal aliens. Rutgers recently introduced the Dream Zone program, a program originally started at New York University in order to teach students to empathize with illegal aliens. The 3-hour program teaches on topics pertaining to illegal aliens, including the history of migration to the United States and legislation that impacts DACA. Yuriana Garcia Tellez, the senior program coordinator of undocumented student services at Rutgers, went on to say that the program should be mandatory for all Rutgers students. Quote, I think training like these are important to start conversations about how to begin supporting undocumented students in institutions, especially for people who are going into higher education. The training should be mandatory.
The only thing that should be mandatory is if you're an illegal immigrant who's at a college, you get thrown in the back of a deportation bus and taken back to whatever country you belong in. That's the only mandatory thing that you should be getting.
Like the idea that not only do they have a undocumented student service at Rutgers, they have so many different people in that program. They have a senior program coordinator.
Exactly.
For people that are illegal. Like, not supposed to be here. It's insane. But they want to teach the students to empathize with those that commit crimes because, you know, I don't know, they'll be sad if they have to go home, I guess.
I suppose.
Fucking stupid.
Tell you what, how about if we deport them, we let them take their college textbooks with them? That way they have something to read on the flight back.
I'm sure there's, you know, colleges in Mexico and Nicaragua. It'll be fine. Let's go on to the next story, though.
This is the last story in Career College Craziness.
Oh, yeah. So this is the last story for this week. A professor says that wealth redistribution will fix the incel problem. Professor Tyler Zimmer of Northeastern Illinois University, in an op-ed published by Slate, argues that Americans would not have a need for sex robots if we were to embrace wealth redistribution. Zimmer contends that the problem of sexual fulfillment in America is directly tied to financial instability and the anxiety and stress it entails, remarking that there's nothing sexy about a society that forces millions of people to endure long hours, unpredictable work schedules, tyrannical management practices, and insufficient pay just to make or try to make ends meet. He also claims that these social ills could be easily remedied by laying hold of a few days' worth of Jeff Bezos' earnings. He suggested radically shortening the workday without reducing worker wages to redistribute leisure time more evenly and justly through society, asserting that additional leisure time would give more people a chance at sexual fulfillment. I think he doesn't understand the incel problem at its core with all these things that he said. If you don't know what incel is, it's involuntary celibate. People that have never had sex, and that is not of their own doing.
And you know,
but he thinks that if you just have communism, you'll end that.
And you know, it's interesting how he's like, we should lay off a few days worth of Jeff Bezos' earnings. Now, Jeff Bezos' current net worth, now this doesn't necessarily mean this is what he's earning in a year, but his entire net worth, meaning everything. If you took Jeff Bezos' net worth, which according to Google right now, in 2018 is $132 billion, and you divide that among all 320 million Americans, every American would get $413. So if you think $413 is going to be the difference between guys getting laid and guys not getting laid, I just don't see it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't see how that would help at all. He sees a problem in America and he says communism will fix it. That's all he's saying. And this is a professor that teaches people.
Exactly. So that's really all we have for current year college craziness this week. I guess we can move on to the international news now, can't we? We'll go through these pretty quickly. We're kind of running a little long right now, so.
Yeah, a bit longer than usual, but this week is full of news. So let's try and get through.
So the first story we have is out of Europe, and we've got some statistics regarding Swedish rapes. So a new study by the Swedish newspaper Aftonbladet has found that 88% of gang rapists in Sweden over the last 6 years have had a migrant background. Of the 112 convicted gang rapists, 82 were born outside of Europe, and only 13 had Swedish parents. 25 rapists were from Afghanistan, 9 were from Iraq, and 7 were from Somalia. The study also found that the median age of victims was just 15 years old, with most of them being between 15 and 20 years old. A similar study of 4,142 court filings regarding sex-related crimes in 40 Swedish courts between 2012 and 2014 found that 95.6% of rapes were committed by men of foreign descent.
So yeah, you know, this is something that Sweden imposed upon itself, these mass migrations of, you know, third worlders. And now they have this massive rape problem, and they're going to commit to keeping all these people here.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I mean, especially when you look at that very last statistic there, 95.6% of rapes between 2012 and 2014, according to the court filings there. 95, almost 96% of people that committed rapes were by men of some sort of foreign descent. Now, they said included in that foreign descent is children who were born in Sweden whose parents were immigrants. I guess that would make them, what, first generation or second generation? Whichever generation that makes them. And, you know, we've talked about that.
Second generation immigrants.
Yeah. We have talked about that before on the show, how it's the children of immigrants are the ones who are actually more likely to commit crimes than immigrants themselves. And so that is not surprising at all. If you were just to look at just, you know, immigrants alone, it's going to be significantly less than that 96% number. But when you add their children together, that's how it's, you know, at that point you're looking at almost entirely men of foreign descent are committing the rape problem in Sweden. I mean, we look at that.
It's crazy to think. It's crazy to think how many lives wouldn't have been destroyed and affected if they just didn't let these people in.
Yeah, so many.
Almost all of the people that had been raped in Sweden.
Yeah. So, anyways, I guess we can move on to the next story. This is something that happened just yesterday, so we'll kind of, you know, we don't know too much, but what we do know, we're talking here. There was an ISIS stabbing attack in Paris. On Saturday, a terrorist in Paris screaming Allahu Akbar killed one person and injured 4 others with a box cutter before being shot and killed by police. The attacker was identified as Kamzat Azimov, an Islamic radical and migrant from Chechnya, born in 1997. He was, however, a French citizen. According to the French media, Azimov was on a French intelligence agency watch list of potential jihadists and terrorists called the S-File. ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attack. So this is yet another terrorist that police were aware of who was allowed to go off and commit a terrorist act, injuring 4 people and killing another person.
Yep.
You know,
this has happened so many times in France, especially with just these knife attacks.
Yeah, and you know, I think we had another story that we cut about how knife crime in England is going up. That's not getting any better either. And gun crime in London is also going up too, where they have guns that are banned. So,
yeah, all crime is up.
Ready to move on to the next story?
Yes.
So we're now moving on to the Middle East, and this is kind of going to go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning of the program when we were talking about just the whole Israel-Iran situation. We mentioned how there was some Israeli airstrikes, so we're going to talk about those right now. The Israeli army said Thursday that airstrikes they carried out against Iranian military targets in Syria have set the Iranian forces in Syria back, quote, many months. The move was countered by Iranian forces launching roughly 20 missiles towards Israel, but all of them were either stopped by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system or fell short and landed in Syria. According to IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, he stressed that Israel is not seeking an escalation of hostilities against Iran, despite Israel striking the Iranian military targets in Syria first. He also said Israel strikes were coordinated in advance with Russian forces in the country. The clashes between Iran and Israel have been the largest direct clashes since the end of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. This kind of goes back to what I was saying as to why I don't think there's going to be full-blown war between Iran and Israel, which would then cause us to get involved. Because even though Iran does have forces in Syria, they don't have that many forces in Syria. And since Israel pretty much just bombed them to the point where it's going to set them back that much farther, plus the U.S. pulling out of the Iran deal, which is going to cripple the Iranian economy even further than it already is, Iran is not going to be able to sustain military forces in Syria much longer, which, you know, that benefits Israel, which I don't like Israel being benefited by, you know, really anything in the Middle East at all. That being said, it's going to de-escalate the conflict in a way. Does that kind of make sense by saying that?
Yeah.
So, you know, granted, I hate what Israel's doing. I don't like the fact that they are the ones who instigated this against Iran. This wasn't Iran launching attacks first. This was Israel starting it. But that being said, they've done what they're doing, and even, anyways, you get what I'm saying. Please continue.
Yeah, so almost immediately after Trump's statements on leaving the Iran deal, Israel launched a new offensive into Syria. And I've been debating, you know, arguing with these blinded by faith evangelicals all week. You know, they try to say that this was like some sort of justified border defense of themselves, but they initially striked deep into Syria, near Damascus. That's nowhere near the border. And, you know, for days, you know, the Syrians just had to take bombardment, and they finally respond, and then the media and Israel try to play it up as, oh, they're just defending themselves. They're justified in striking back now because they were attacked first. They wouldn't have been attacked if they weren't shooting into Syria all week long. If they stopped invading all the goddamn time, this wouldn't be a problem.
Precisely.
It's so irritating.
Now, one thing I will stress,
you know, over the last couple of years, Israel has fired on over 100 different occasions airstrikes into Syria, and we're supposed to have sympathy for the people that violate national sovereignty.
Yeah, it's insane. But, you know, the one thing that this IDF spokesperson said that, you know, I checked and actually was fairly accurate with what he was saying was him saying that they coordinated the strikes in advance with the Russian forces. Because, let's face it, when it all comes down to it, as much as Israel hates Russia, as much as Israel hates Iran, what they really don't want is full-scale war against Russia in Syria, especially in Israel. Israel has a very strong military. A lot of that's because we keep sending them a lot of money and equipment. But that being said, when it comes down to it, they really don't want to see their citizens get wiped out. They really don't want to fight a war. Netanyahu is a warmonger himself.
When they fired, Netanyahu was with Putin when they responded with the airstrikes into Syria after the Iranian response.
And Putin doesn't want to have to sacrifice his own men in Syria more than he already is. So
it's arguable whether or not these were even Iranian strikes to begin with. They could have been Syrian. The Iranians have denied that they're even the ones doing this. I mean, they do have a presence, but it wasn't their missiles, but potentially.
And I almost want to say that I think that it probably wasn't necessarily Iranian forces entirely. It was probably Syrian forces, probably Syrian pro-Assad forces that had help from Iranians, or it was Iranian equipment they were using. But they're just going to say Iranian. If it was actually a group of a couple hundred Iranian military forces that just got bombed by Israel, they would have done more than just launch 20 missiles that they know are going to get all shot down by the Iron Dome. They would have responded much more heavily. You would have heard more quotes coming out from the Iranian government, criticizing Israel for the move. So, as much as people want to freak out and think that World War III is always around the corner, when you really stop to look at stuff, it doesn't look as bad as things are. What we want to do is make sure that they don't get any worse. And so that's why it's good to keep up the pressure on the people that actually have the ability to start this sort of stuff. So
yeah, it's just so frustrating. This is a thing, quickly to say that we didn't even add, but the Syrian government had recently taken back arms from Syrian rebels.
Yeah.
And amongst the arms were heavy quantities of Israeli weapons. The Israelis give the weapons to the terrorists that they claim as reason for them to be able to invade because there's so much instability. It's something else.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next story.
Yeah. So the next story is some good stuff, actually, in the Middle East. And that is, on Wednesday, Iraqi officials announced that intricate cross-border sting enabled them to capture 5 senior ISIS leaders. The operation took the U.S.-Iraqi coalition 3 months to execute, starting with the capture of Alwan al-Ithwawi, whom Iraqis say is a top aide to ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. Using information from al-Thawani gained during interrogations, the U.S. launched an airstrike in mid-April that killed 39 suspected ISIS members. Following the airstrike, al-Thawani contacted several of his ISIS colleagues hiding in Syria and told them to cross the border, where they were ultimately captured. President Trump lauded the capture on Twitter, simply tweeting, "5 most wanted leaders of ISIS just captured."
So this is good news. These guys were all in the top 10 most wanted ISIS terrorists that were out there. And, if you can interpret from what you were reading here, yeah, we got that al-Thawi guy to essentially turn on his own guys. Now, it says during interrogations they gained that information. In order for someone to turn on their own members and give up that much information, we either gave him something or we forced it out of him. And I know the whole torture debate is up in the air because of the possible confirmation of Gina Haspel as the next, I think, CIA director. Is that right? In U.S. Congress, and a lot of people know that she has in the past supported torture. And the U.S. likes to say that we don't use torture, but I mean, we use torture. Let's not kid ourselves here. We use it a lot, even though we don't like to say it. So I want to think that we probably tortured this guy out of his information. But that being said, hey, we captured 5 of the top ISIS leaders. So you know what? If it was worth it for that, I probably think so.
Yeah. Let's move on now to a story out of Australia. At least 6 people are dead following a shooting in Osmington, West Australia. Most of the victims were children. It is the worst mass shooting in Australia in 22 years. The last being the April 1996 Port Arthur massacre in Port Arthur, Tasmania, where 35 people were killed and 24 others were wounded. Most guns were banned in Australia following the 1996 shooting, with the text of the summary saying, "Firearms license applicants would be required to take a safety course and show a genuine reason for owning a firearm, which could not include self-defense. According to the Crime Statistics Agency, firearm offenses have spiked since 2011, and there has been at least 99 shootings in the past 20 months, with more than one a week since January of 2015. Firearm offenses are up from 2,000 incidences in 2011 to over 5,000 in 2016. So we added this story this week just to show that you can have a country that has some of the most restrictive gun laws in the world, and it doesn't protect you.
No, it doesn't.
These things still happen.
And the left likes to use Australia as this grand example of, oh, you know, gun control works. Just look at Australia. Well, their firearm
confiscation works.
Their firearm offenses since 2011 are over 2.5 times higher than what they used to be. Okay, they are dealing. You know, you talk about, you think the U.S. has some sort of gun crime epidemic. In comparison, you look at, you know, how much gun crime is in the United States, it has actually been dropping year after year. Whereas in Australia, it's going higher and higher and higher. And you just have this mass shooting where 7 people are killed in a house in Australia. You know, yeah, Australia used to be a country you didn't see that sort of stuff happen. And I'm not saying gun control there worked, because it obviously didn't. Otherwise, you wouldn't see firearm offenses continue to rise. If anything, you'd see them stagnate or decrease. So, plus, you know, a lot of people like to point out the fact that, you know, Australia banned guns and confiscated them. It actually did not lower their overall crime rate at all. In fact, their violent crime rate went up after they confiscated weapons. But, you know, the more you know.
Yeah. So to close out the week, we're going to talk about some North Korea stuff.
So the first thing that we want to talk about here to end the show about North Korea is a poll that was taken. It is a new poll from Pew Research showing that 71% of Americans support Trump's policy efforts towards North Korea, compared to only 21% who oppose. However, 49%, almost half, believe that North Korea isn't serious about efforts for peace. The survey also found that support for Trump over North Korea is higher than American support was for Obama's policies towards the Iran deal. So, you know, we talked about the Iran deal at the very beginning and how, you know, how popular that was. Trump's North Korea is a lot more popular than Obama's Iran deal. So, just keep that in mind. Now, that being said, moving on to this next story, which is our last story of the week, which is really, really cool. North Korea has scheduled a ceremony to dismantle its nuclear testing site on May 23rd to 25th, ahead of President Trump's summit with Kim Jong-un next month. North Korea's foreign ministry said Saturday that all the tunnels at the country's northeastern testing ground would be destroyed by explosion, and that observation and research facilities and ground-based testing units will also be removed. North Korea said that they plan to invite journalists from the United States, South Korea, China, Russia, and Great Britain to inspect the dismantling process. The summit between Trump and Kim will be held on June 12th in Singapore, and will be the first meeting ever between a sitting U.S. president and the leader of North Korea. So, good news to end the week. North Korea is dismantling their nuclear testing site. I know, remember when we were talking about that mountain that they used to test underground? They said that that mountain's total height has decreased by almost 2 feet because of the nuclear testing that they did underneath it, which is part of the reason people thought that that thing was going to collapse. So, you know, this is very good news. Very good news.
Yeah. Very good news to close out the week. This has been one of the longest shows in quite a while, but this has been one of the most busy weeks in a very long time.
Yeah, we're right around 2.5 hours right now.
Yeah, but I think it was a good show overall. Anything you want to say, Bob, before we close?
Yes, the last thing I wanted to do is kind of going back to when we were talking about that possible legislation in the House that I was kind of mad about. I looked it up, and House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy and House Majority Whip Steve Scalise are both strongly against the move to try to force the vote on DACA legislation. And Steve Scalise, our House Majority Whip, has said that he is actively trying to whip votes in the House or in the Republican Party members in the House to make sure that they do not gain any more support for that bill. As it stands right now, they still would need those like 9 extra guys or whatever in order for that to happen. But Steve Scalise and Kevin McCarthy are actively...
And when you do stuff like this, you know, there's a reason why we have whips. There is repercussions for doing this. For
Yeah,
these people.
and
you
so
do not receive support from the RNC after you do stuff like this that opposes leadership.
Yeah, so the House, essentially, you know, if you want to summarize it, the House Republican leadership is actively trying to make sure this does not happen. So, you know,
yeah,
I don't really trust those people, but I will say when they put their balls to something, they can get some stuff done. So, yeah, that's really the only thing that I wanted to add. So I think, you know, it's a long show. A lot of stuff happened this week. Hopefully next week won't be as long, but, you know, who knows?
Yeah. But with that said, thank you for listening to another episode of Trump Public Radio, and have a good one.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.